I've never told this story to anyone. I know I shouldn't even do so anonymously at the risk of being connected to it, but it's been eating at me for decades. It happened when I was a kid. I was about 13 years old, and it was the night of Halloween. I lived in a relatively new suburb at the time, which had been built to increase the number of homes in the small town that was growing adjacent to the freeway. It all looks very different now, but back then the area wasn't nearly as developed. Strangely, nowhere was this more obvious than the cemetery that was a few turns off the main road in what used to be the outskirts. At the time, it was mostly vacant. Not enough people had died to fill it up yet. That would change, however, as me and my two friends, who I'll protect by calling Aaron and Michael, decided we wanted to go exploring the empty graveyard instead of trick-or-treating. We knew it would get us in trouble, so we put in some effort to cover our tracks. We wore costumes and started the night by immediately stealing a few bowls of candy that were set out and mixed them all together so it would look as though we actually went trick-or-treating like our parents thought. Then we walked about a mile off the beaten path so we could get to the cemetery without being seen by the cars on the main road. This involved hopping a fence that surrounded a large drainage pond for the freeway and cutting across the banks to hop the fence again into the cemetery grounds. As we got off the residential streets, we were bathed in darkness, which meant there was almost no chance that we would be seen. We thought we were safe, but what we didn't know was that we were being followed. Once we had successfully snuck in, we stomped around and tried to scare each other for laughs. Then we found a few blank gravestones laying around next to a crypt, and we smashed them together just because we could. We took a few chunks as souvenirs. There wasn't much else for us to get up to, though. The whole place was eerily empty. We were used to seeing them filled to the brim with gravestones, but the majority of this space was just uninterrupted grass. Eventually, we got bored, but we weren't ready to leave, so we sat down against the backs of a few gravestones to avoid sitting on top of dead people. There was a view of the freeway that looked pretty cool since it was the only thing that was lit up for miles. For a moment, we were just sitting there being kids. Then it all came crashing down as we heard what sounded like a person behind us. We all jumped in fright and we turned around. We couldn't see anything, just gravestones. The ghastly wailing continued, and then it started to say our names. We shouted at it, trying to claim we weren't scared of it, but we were. We thought we were totally alone, so maybe it was a ghost that was mad at us for being there when we weren't supposed to be. We started walking towards it with small, terrified steps, hoping we would look behind one of the gravestones and see a person messing with us. All three of us were clutching broken chunks of granite as if it would help defend us from the supernatural. When we started getting closer, it seemed like we were localizing the source of the noise. That's when it said something that I wished it wouldn't every single day. For context, my friend Aaron's mother was extremely ill with cancer at the time. That's part of the reason that we were acting out by breaking into the cemetery in the first place. He was in a funk, and he was mad at the world, and he was our friend that we did stuff with. Understandably, Aaron stopped in his tracks when the voice claimed that it was the ghost of his mother. I can't imagine what was going on through his head, a lot of powerful mixed emotions that must have been a lot for a 13-year-old to handle. He shouted back, trying to cast it out, but he was already choking up. The supposed ghost of his mother dug deeper, saying that she just died a few minutes ago. Aaron said that was a lie, but the voice didn't care. It started to cry and say that because he wasn't in the neighborhood like a good boy, his father wasn't able to find him, and she died wondering where her son was and why he didn't love her enough to be there. Aaron yelled again that it wasn't true, that it couldn't be, but it struck him so badly he was failing to hold back his tears. Michael and I started trying our best to console him, not really knowing how. But then the mood changed on a dime when the unknown voice stopped crying and started laughing. Then it didn't sound like the ghost of a woman anymore, but a snickering boy. We looked over and saw someone crawling out of their hiding spot behind a gravestone. It was somebody we knew, but I can't say his name. He was a couple of years older than us, and he was a neighborhood bully. He must have seen us sneaking off and followed us so he could pull some kind of prank like this for kicks. All of Aaron's sadness turned into anger in an instant as he charged toward the bully, who was laughing so hard he didn't notice how pissed off Aaron was. Nobody expected him to do what he did next. Aaron tackled the boy to the ground and started beating on him, screaming furiously that it was way too far to joke about someone's sick mother dying. Michael and I agreed, and we hated being bullied by this kid too, so we let it happen, figuring it would teach the jerk a lesson. Unfortunately, we didn't notice before it was too late that Aaron wasn't just pounding the kid in the face with his fists, but with the chunk of gravestone he'd broken off a few minutes prior. After just a few more seconds, there was no sound or movement from the bully, no indication at all that he was still fighting back. Michael and I exchanged a worried look right before deciding that this, in fact, was going too far and we needed to stop it. We rushed over to Aaron and pulled him off the bully. As we held him back, we looked down at the other kid and saw just how badly he'd been beaten. The jagged stone had turned his face into an unrecognizable bloody mess. There were deep gashes all over his face and head. Even in the darkness, we knew. But we still waited for him to get up or to at least groan in pain. But he never did. Gradually, Aaron let go of his rage and he came to realize what he'd done. Michael and I were already stunned. He broke away from us, but then he rushed back into panic, trying to wake the kid up by shaking and yelling his name. But none of it was any good. He finally looked back at us and he asked us to say that he was just unconscious and not dead. Only one of us knew how to check. I could see that Michael was shaking as he stepped to the body and knelt down, checking for a pulse. He checked and waited, even bringing his ear down to his face to check for breathing. But unfortunately, he only confirmed the worst. Aaron had killed our neighborhood bully. After an internal silence, Aaron snapped us out of our daze. He took charge of the moment. He led us through the cover-up. We all thought about just coming clean, but we were so afraid of the repercussions. Well, Aaron was, and there was a small sick part of us that was glad that it happened, to be honest. The bully got what he deserved, to a certain extent. We did our best to think so anyways. Besides, we had no idea how to act in a situation like that, so we just listened to the orders that we heard. We dragged the body to the fence around the drainage pond and ripped the bottom of the chain link fence out of the dirt so we could pull the body under to the other side. Then we got a gravestone and a bunch of broken chunks and threw them over, including the ones we thought were going to be souvenirs for the night. We took off his shoes and his jeans, then slid a gravestone underneath his shirt, fastening it to his chest by tying his jeans around his torso. Then we tied his shoes to his ankles and filled them with stones. Aaron then dragged the body into the pond, and he was holding it up until he was neck deep. Then he pushed it towards the center and let go. We watched it sink as Aaron turned around and came out of the water looking like a completely different person. Aaron's clothes needed to dry at least a little bit so we didn't look obviously drenched before we went back to the neighborhood, and we needed to make sure that the body wouldn't immediately float to the surface. So after throwing everything related to the killing in the pond and washing our hands of the blood, we hopped the fence and sat on the banks for a while where we couldn't be seen. It was totally silent the entire time. The bloodstains had been rinsed out of his clothes, but we would never be able to look at Aaron without seeing them. It was on our hands now too, and we had to live with that. It was hard to pretend to be a normal kid after that twisted coming-of-age moment. The disappearance was the talk of the town for days, even weeks, until the body finally floated to the surface a few weeks later and the murder was discovered. Nobody ever suspected us, but the publicity of the case going unsolved was torturous for us all, and the worst for Aaron. Michael and I were able to get back to a semblance of normal after a couple of years, but Aaron was never the same. When his mother finally died, he never talked to us again, and he never made any other friends. He kind of became the town degenerate, and nobody but Michael and I knew the real reason why. When he was 17, he ran away from home, and he's never been seen or heard from since. Very few people experience something so traumatizing at a young age that it sticks with them forever. I'm one of those people. I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. My older brother and I grew up in a broken household. Our mom raised us, our dad was a deadbeat and disappeared out of our lives. Our mom worked 2 jobs to provide for us. She'd sometimes have to work night shifts and would usually have our grandma stay at the house on nights that she had to work. My brother Chump is 2 years older than me. We were fortunate enough to have our own bedrooms given the circumstances. We lived in a small house, but for the 3 of us and on our mom's dime alone, it wasn't terrible. The area in which we lived wasn't amazing, though. It was a night like any other. I can't remember if it was a school night or if it was a weekend. I don't remember any tiny details like that, but what I do remember is I was in the living room with my grandma. My grandma was watching TV, and I was playing with Legos on my Lego table. I was being loud and making a mess with them because I remember my grandma kept saying, "Rock, quiet down." Chump was already in bed. My bedtime was 9:30, given that it was probably approaching that time. I'm guessing this was a weekend night, otherwise, my bedtime would have been earlier. The layout of the house was simple. Living room, dining room, and kitchen are all connected, and then there was a hallway which led to the bathroom and 3 bedrooms. Our mom's bedroom was at the end of the hall, mine was in the middle. Our grandma would sleep in our mom's bed when she'd stay over to watch us. Eventually, I had to go to sleep. My grandma would always go to sleep early too, so right after saying good night to me, she would go to the bathroom to brush her teeth and stuff before going to sleep as well. I was never one to be afraid of the dark or anything. My mom says I used to be a really brave child. But that night, I woke up in the middle of the night, something unusual for me because I remember myself being a very heavy sleeper. I heard something outside in the hallway, creaks in the floor. The wood floors in that house were always very creaky. Anytime someone walked down the hall, you'd hear it. I thought my grandma was going to the bathroom. However, the creaking didn't stop. It sounded like the creaks were moving back and forth. I got out of bed and went to the door to listen. Now, I heard whispering. I was more confused than anything. I thought my grandma was talking to Chump. I opened the door and looked into the hallway, and what I saw still haunts me. There was a tall, naked, skinny woman leaning on the wall with her head between her arms. She was whispering stuff to herself, and then, like a deer in headlights, her head whipped around to look at me. I screamed for my grandma like a little girl and slammed my door shut. There were pounds on my door, and the woman on the other side was screaming a name, "Bonnie, Bonnie, open the door." I kept screaming as loud as I could for my grandma, and I heard her scream in the hallway. I distinctly remember my grandma screaming, "Get the out of here." The woman screamed, "Where is Bonnie?" My grandma was in her mid-60s at the time, and she was still pretty quick. She yelled at me to keep my door locked, and she managed to fend off this crazy woman as she also called the police at the same time. I don't know how she did it, but my grandma was one tough woman. The woman left the house screaming, "Bonnie," and after locking the door, my grandma came to hug both me and Chump, who was awake and also crying from the commotion. We all sat huddled together until the police came. By that time, my grandma told us to just go back to sleep. This simply was a matter of my grandma not locking one of the doors, mixed with living in an already shady area. That woman had to be on crack or something. Seeing what I saw at such a young age did a number on me. I couldn't sleep alone for a long time. It was this incident that really resulted in us moving out of that house not long after. Around 8 years ago, I moved out of my mom's house into my first apartment in the city of Chicago. The place was a nice 3-bedroom apartment on the south side of the city in a friendly neighborhood by the University of Illinois. I lived with 2 roommates, Patrick and Kelsey. Kelsey was a good friend of mine, while Patrick was a good friend of Kelsey's who I had not met prior, although we ended up getting along just fine. One night, about a month after moving in, I met up with a few friends of mine for drinks at a bar more in the center of the city, around 15 minutes from my place. It was a good time, and I ended up getting slightly drunk before getting into a cab at 1 a.m. and heading home. Upon walking into my apartment, I noticed that Patrick's door was open, showing that he was staying at his girlfriend's place, while Kelsey's door was closed with the light from his TV shining underneath the crack. I made my way to my bedroom and put on my own TV before lying down to prepare for sleep. After around 10 minutes, I heard my doorbell ring. Half asleep, I woke up, confused as it was 1:30 in the morning, so I ignored it. A few seconds later, the doorbell rang again, and then again a few seconds after that. It's important to mention that my roommate Kelsey had a good amount of side cash by dealing weed to a few people. He was also a huge stoner himself, so the idea that he fell asleep while waiting for a late-night customer to come over was not out of the realm of possibility. With this in mind, I went over to my intercom and asked who was there. A girl's voice answered back, "It's Kaylee." "I'm here to see Kelsey." Thinking that my suspicions had been confirmed, I exited out of my front door and headed down the stairs. The door to the outside of our apartment building was made of tall glass, so you could easily identify any potential visitors. Here, I saw an attractive college-age blonde girl with glasses waiting patiently outside. I had never seen this person before, however, she appeared to be non-threatening. Besides having random customers over to grab weed, Kelsey would also have some random girls over to hook up with from time to time. Because of this, I let my guard down slightly and cracked the door open. The girl then repeated what she had said moments earlier over the intercom, "Hi, I'm here to see Kelsey." I replied, "Okay, he's here. Just follow me up," and I held the door open for her. She grabbed the handle, and I turned around to head back up the stairs. As I was walking back up, I quickly noticed that this Kaylee girl was not following me up. I glanced over my shoulder and saw that she was still standing outside holding the door open, only now she was staring off to her right, almost as if waiting for someone. At this moment, a tidal wave of fear crashed over me as I realized something horrible was more than likely about to happen. I continued walking up to my place, quicker now. After turning the corner of the stairs, I heard the door swing open and then heavy footsteps running up the stairs behind me. I looked over my shoulder again, and what I saw shook me to my core. A tall, Gangly man with sunken-in eyes and greasy long hair down to his shoulders was running up the stairs straight at me. He was wearing a sleeveless black t-shirt, and apart from the cheap-looking tribal tattoos I saw creeping up his arms, I noticed he was also holding what looked like a lead pipe in his right hand. At this moment, my body shot full of adrenaline as I turned around and raced back up the stairs and into my apartment. I turned around to close the door and saw the man, who was now only a few feet from entering my apartment, the pipe over his head. With less than a second to spare, I slammed the door and locked it in one swift motion. Immediately after, I heard the thud of the pipe hit my door. I stood facing the now closed door, paralyzed, as the man hit the door 3 more times while shouting obscenities at me. He eventually gave up and ran down the stairs and out the front door. I ran into Kelsey's room to wake him up. After telling him what exactly had just gone down, he responded by telling me that, yes, he knew a blonde girl named Kaylee, only he had just met her earlier the same day. Apparently, while I was out with my friends, the doorbell rang while Kelsey was home alone. Instead of going down to let her in himself, Kelsey buzzed her up after just hearing her name, thinking she was a friend of mine. When she reached the door to our unit, he opened it and let her in. He said it seemed like she was confused, mentioning that she was looking for someone named Felix. Kelsey responded by saying his own name and that no one named Felix lived here. He mentioned she stayed near the entrance of the unit and kept reaching behind her to make sure the door stayed open before leaving only a few moments later. After hearing this, my theory is that these same people came earlier in the day and, not expecting to have someone just let them up through the buzzer, the girl made the mistake of forgetting to keep the door to the building open, rendering the attacker unable to enter during this first attempt. Either way, we both got extremely lucky that night. We did call the police, who arrived and asked for more information about what happened. They asked if there was anyone we knew who might want to do us harm, and we answered no, which was the truth, as this seemed to be a completely random attack. The cops left soon after, saying that there was nothing much they could do. We never saw that Kaylee girl or her scumbag partner again. This story happened to me 4 years ago when I was in my mid-22s. This whole experience will probably scar me for life, and it's still vividly imprinted in my mind. The day was the 17th of June, and I had the house to myself because my parents were on a 2-week vacation in France. It was sometime after dusk, probably around 9 p.m., and the weather was scorchingly hot. Believe me when I say I was sweating my ass off with just my tank top and shorts on. The heat was so unbearable that I allowed in some fresh air, opening all the living room and bedroom windows, planning on closing them right before hitting the hay. Now, before fast-forwarding, I must mention that I was feeling extremely exhausted. On that same day, I had taken 3 exams in the morning and played a volleyball match in the afternoon. Thus, once I ate my dinner while browsing social media in my room, I collapsed into bed without even realizing it. I woke up at around 3 a.m. to the muffled sounds of thunderbolts and a draft of cold, fresh air hitting my face. A strong wind was blowing, and all the shutters left open were noisily banging. Still drowsy, I flicked on the lamp, but the light wouldn't turn on. I checked the plug using my phone flashlight, but everything was fine. I begrudgingly climbed out of bed and looked out my bedroom window. There were menacing rainy black clouds on the horizon. A typical late-night summer storm was approaching. Given that every lamp post on the street was off, I instantly knew there had been a blackout. Phone flashlight in hand, I dizzily headed down the hallway to shut the windows before rain started pouring down. When I got to the last window, though, I noticed the mosquito net lifted up. This struck me as weird since I was quite positive I hadn't left it that way. Getting a little paranoid, I turned behind me to shine the flashlight around the living room and check my surroundings. The furniture was still in place, no drawers or closet doors left open, no decorative objects missing or moved into unfamiliar positions. Everything seemed normal. I briefly peeked my head out of my window to look outside. Trees were swaying in the howling wind, leaves shaking in a frenzy, a powerful display of nature's force, but still nothing remotely suspicious. Maybe the mechanism is faulty, or the strong wind somehow pushed it up. Against my better judgment, I convinced myself it was useless to lose sleep over it. Feeling relieved, I closed the shutters and started walking back to my bedroom, eager to get a decent night's rest. Little did I know that night would be anything but pleasant. I happened to casually turn my head to the flight of stairs connected to the attic when a vivid burst of light flashing from up there caught my eyes. I paid no mind. The attic was adorned with huge glass windows, so it was no wonder to see light spreading across the room. It was probably sheet lightning. I kept walking, subconsciously waiting for the thunder to come, but it never did. I stopped in my tracks. Given that the flash I saw was powerful and bright, the lightning had to be pretty close, so why couldn't any rumbling noise be heard? I started to think maybe it wasn't lightning. What if it was a flashlight? As doubt crept in, my heart began to race. I quickly put two and two together, and now the strange occurrence of the mosquito net left up made much more sense. The nightmarish realization hit me that an intruder could have broken into my house. At first, I panicked. Did they hear me shutting the windows? Were they carrying any weapons? Did they plan on just robbing my house, or did they also have worse intentions? Normally, I would call my parents to deal with it, but since they were away, it was all on me now. While those sickening thoughts were swirling in my mind, the distinct sound of a doorknob being twisted and turned made me instantly snap out of my catatonic state. I shot my head to face the living room entrance, and through the glass frame, I spotted a shadowy figure just a few inches outside of the front door. There was a person standing there, most likely an accomplice of the guy upstairs. Words are not enough to describe how powerless and defenseless I felt. Despite the overwhelming fear, I did my best to keep my cool, trying to make as little noise as possible. I tiptoed in the direction of the stairs leading down to the basement, which was directly connected to the garage. I figured I could safely escape from there. While I was making my descent down, still using my phone as a source of light, I dialed 911. Speaking as softly as possible, I informed the operator about what just happened. He tried to calm me down and reassured me that the police would be there in less than 10 minutes. He also added that I should lock myself in a safe room and wait for the officers to show up. I was about to reply that I could easily sneak outside through the garage door when, all of a sudden, I lost the call. I immediately checked the phone and realized that down there, I had no signal. As if that wasn't enough, I also noticed the battery was almost dead. Once I reached the basement, I nervously assessed what to do. I could try and find an emergency flashlight, but now I was so close to escaping from the house that I didn't want to waste time rummaging through the drawers. Besides, I was mindful that the intruders upstairs could have heard me. In the heat of the moment, I exited the basement as fast as I could. Nonetheless, while making my way towards the garage door, I got a feeling in my gut telling me I was being watched. I don't even know why, maybe my sixth sense had picked up on something, but I pointed my phone to illuminate the back seats of my car. And there he was, a man's face stuck to the rearview mirror. A disgusting, revolting face with dead, bulging wide eyes and a malicious yellowish grin spreading across its cheeks. He kept staring at me so intently it almost looked like he was piercing into my soul. He slid his dirty hand against the glass, waving me hello in an unnaturally slow motion. At that point, it happened. My phone battery died, turning off the flashlight and leaving me in total darkness. I felt my heart in my throat. I had never been more scared in my entire life. My whole body was quivering and shaking in fear. When I heard the car door opening, I lost it. I screamed. I screamed like a little girl as I somehow managed to unlock the garage door and bolt outside, climbing up the driveway ramp. By that time, heavy rain had started pouring down. I hopped over the gate and ran to the nearest house, yelling like a lunatic for the neighbors to rush outside. They came out in shock, and I explained to them the whole situation, almost out of breath and soaking wet. In the meantime, I heard sirens in the distance. 2 police cars rolled down the street, and I practically ran into the officer's arms, screaming that there were 3 strangers in my house. 4 agents went into my house, guns drawn, while another one took my description of the events. Those 3 men were all gone, though, and to this day, I don't think they've ever been caught. Some antiques which held some value were stolen, however, I must say it was no big deal for my family. For the remainder of the night, I couldn't sleep at all. I kept tossing and turning, jumping at the slightest sounds, ruminating relentlessly on the horrific experience. But I kid you not, another chilling surprise was lying in wait. When morning came, I spotted a small piece of paper sticking out of the edge of my bed. I picked it up and went frozen stiff. The following words were written: "Bye bye beauty, you look cute when you sleep." Let me give you some context before the story begins. When I was 18 years old, I lived a pretty normal life. I had just finished high school the year before the story takes place. I had always been one for horror, anything, whether it was movies, games, jump scares, you name it, and I loved it. I never seemed to be afraid of anything, and I loved that it allowed me to go and do things that made me appear tougher to girls who I was interested in at the time or who were interested in me. I thought of it almost like a superpower. My friend had always talked about this REM-induced real-life nightmare called sleep paralysis. I, however, had never experienced such a thing. My friend Ellie suffered from extreme lucid dreaming. She explained to me several times about how certain stimulators or outside factors could play into her dreams and mold them into what could potentially be a heavenly experience full of fun and wonder, or could just as easily turn into a bone-chilling nightmare straight out of hell. Being the light sleeper I am, I saw no chance of it occurring, so I kind of just let it go right over my head. One night, Ellie texted me and asked me to come over as she had just suffered another so-called evil experience due to her sleep condition. When I arrived, I found her asleep again, seemingly peacefully. I took a seat on her stool that she had for her makeup dresser right by the window and started playing a game on my phone. 30 minutes or so went by, and I figured she was peacefully asleep and it would probably be okay for me to leave as long as I let her know that I stopped by as she requested. But suddenly, Ellie awoke and started screaming. This was a different kind of scream, though, a type of scream I had never heard before, especially from her. It was almost mumbled, I don't know how else to describe it. Her eyes bulged open, and I ran over to her side. I asked her if she was having a bad dream. She started shaking. I grabbed a hold of her to try to calm her down, but the tremors grew. I asked her what was going on, but no response. I figured this was just another one of her so-called sleep paralysis episodes. I did my best to comfort her. After about 40 or so seconds went by, she regained full control of her body. I made sure she was okay and then left to go back to my house, as it was almost 2 o'clock in the morning. Right as I got home, I received a very panicked text reading, "The hallucinations won't stop." I asked her to clarify what she meant, but no response. After about 20 minutes went by, I took it upon myself to head back over to her place. When I arrived, I noticed the illumination of red and blue covering her front porch and the surrounding road signs. I ran up to her house, desperately trying to find out what happened. As I approached the house, I noticed Ellie was speaking with one of the officers on the scene. When I went up to talk to her, Ellie and the officer walked me over to a more secluded area. What I found out still sends chills up my spine to this day. Apparently, when I had gone over to Ellie's that night, she wasn't asleep at all, she was pretending to be. Evidently, right behind me was a tall, skinny homeless man hiding in her closet. The police had also found a very large kitchen knife on him as well. The theory to this day is Ellie thought she was having an episode when, in reality, this very real man was quietly creeping towards her in her bedroom. Supposedly, when I had entered her house, it was enough to spook the man into hiding, and my presence was enough to keep him hidden. This gave Ellie the time to call 911 and report the situation, which in turn resulted in the police arriving almost immediately after I had left. Thankfully, the man was taken into custody rather quickly. To this day, I don't know what to think about that night, other than that I could have very easily saved her life simply by keeping her company during what I thought was a very stressful situation. This, in turn, could have resulted in some very scary and heinous acts that would have taken place if I had been there any later. I hope I never experience such a thing. That would be what finally trips my fear factor without a doubt. Way back when I was a teenager, my friend's house was broken into. My mom was out of town, and I was at my friend Acer's house. We lived in a middle-class to upper-class neighborhood in the suburbs. Nothing super fancy, just a pretty average American home. All the houses looked similar in design, and they all had the same cookie-cutter, average-sized yard. Friend Acer lived right down the street, and I wanted to hang out over there and sleep over because I didn't like to stay home alone at night, and my mom wasn't really sure if I was ready for it yet either. Quite frankly, I was 11 years old, and I was a pretty shy and timid kid that was always sucked into the Xbox. I didn't play sports, and my dad wasn't in the picture very much. I was kind of a mama's boy, as embarrassing as that is to admit, but it's the truth. I was scared to stay home alone for a whole night. It was okay, though, because Acer's parents let me sleep over. Acer's parents, Beck and Irina, were really cool. It was a Saturday night, and they were also having company over. They were grilling out and having some drinks by the fire while Acer and I and a few of his younger cousins ran around the yard, playing catch, jumping on the trampoline, and swimming in their pool. After a few hours of being kids and bouncing off the walls, we grew tired, so we hung out inside for a bit. Then eventually, we made our way outside for an hour or so to hang out with the adults until our curfew came up. I would say around 11 o'clock, his parents made us go inside to get ready for bed. They put a movie on for all of us kids in the basement, and we set up a bunch of sleeping bags. We were watching some random movie, I don't remember what it was, but after a while, I fell asleep. I'm a light sleeper, so it wasn't a surprise when I woke up to one of the doors creeping open in the basement, along with some heavy footsteps, which sounded like they were coming from the stairs. I lifted my head up to see what was going on, but I couldn't see much. It was really dark down there, and I figured it was one of Acer's little cousins maybe just using the restroom or something, so I laid back down. I rolled over and went back to sleep, but within a matter of minutes, I woke to a pounding sound. I couldn't tell what the banging noise was, but I could tell it was coming from behind us, towards the stairs. Acer's basement was a decent size, and we were in the living room part of it, but on the other side, there was a bar and like 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. I thought the noise was coming from downstairs, but I wasn't totally sure. I thought that it might have been one of the adults and that maybe they were just grabbing something from downstairs, so I tried to close my eyes again. It was really dark down there, and I didn't expect it to be a stranger either. That, or I thought that maybe one of the adults went to the restroom as well. I didn't have a phone, so I couldn't check the time or get a hold of anyone. I wasn't really sure I needed to anyways. I sat and listened for a while, though, and I couldn't hear the adults outside partying anymore. Maybe they were done for the night and coming in to check on us, I thought. You remember when you were a kid and thought there were monsters under your bed or in the closet? That fear you would feel, but deep down, you knew there was nothing to be scared about because you knew it wasn't real. Kind of felt like that. I went back to sleep one more time, but this time, what happened was far more disturbing than the previous times I'd been woken up. I woke up to a man on top of me, shaking me and trying to grab me. Other kids and Acer all ran to get the adults for help. I put up a fight, but eventually, the strange man grabbed me full on and started to run. I was being kidnapped. I did everything I could to try to get away, kicking, biting, scratching, and I even tried to dig my fingers through the man's eyes, but nothing was working. I was hopeless. That is, until Acer's dad chased him down and hit him in the head with a fire extinguisher. We both fell straight to the ground on the sidewalk, and I hit my head on the cement. Somehow, the man managed to stand up and run away, and since he had a mask on, we had no way of identifying him. I wonder if things would have ended differently had the other adults been there still. Maybe they would have chased the man down and beat his ass, and he would have got arrested, and I could actually sleep at night. But for the longest of times, I couldn't sleep. The same nightmare came to me over and over and would replay in my head. We think that the man let himself inside through the sliding glass door in the basement. I wonder how long he was standing there, planning the attack. If I would have listened to my gut, maybe things would have turned out differently, but I actually ended up with a concussion anyway. Nothing too severe, but still a concussion. Ever since that day, no matter what it is, I always listen to my intuition, and I suggest you do the same. It's always better to be safe than sorry, believe me. I'm also really glad that Acer's parents were still awake, or maybe I would have been murdered or kidnapped or even worse. My family and I used to go camping all the time, sometimes more than 3 or 4 times a year, even. We were camping in White Mountain National Forest, and it was our first time doing a more primitive type of camp. Usually, we went to traditional campsites like Yogi Bear Jellystone or even KOA, but this time we were in for something different. I wasn't that excited for it because I didn't think it would be as fun. I think I was 14 when this happened, around that age at least. I was still in an angsty teenage phase, if you will. I was still a good kid, just a little emotional and rough around the edges. When we got there, while my parents were setting up, my little brother and I wanted to do some exploring. We walked around for a while, but we didn't go too far as we didn't know the area and we didn't want to get lost or stray too far from camp. We talked about anything you would imagine 2 unsupervised children would talk about. I started messing with my little brother, Blair, saying things like we were lost and to watch out for the bears and the monsters. Pretty crappy, I know, but I thought it was funny. We messed with each other like that all the time, but I could tell he was actually starting to get scared, so I let him know I was only joking. I was hoping to find a cool bank offshore, like a place we could swim or fish. I found the perfect spot. He ran over to it to investigate it, and I fell in love with the scenery. It truly was beautiful. Our little kid brains loved every second of the outdoors. I knew we had been gone a while, though, and I was in charge of my brother, and I didn't want us to get in trouble. Mom wanted us back before dark anyway, and we were starting to lose daylight. So, we walked back to camp, had dinner, and did our nightly ritual with the family, like playing board games. We had a campfire and all that fun stuff until eventually, it was time for bed. Blair and I were staying in our own tent, while our mom and dad had their own as well. We got our sleeping bags, a lantern, and not much of anything else, maybe some snacks that we snuck into our tent and a DVD player to watch a movie. I fell asleep, but I remember waking up for seemingly no reason in a groggy state of mind. I turned over towards Blair and noticed he was gone. I instantly shot up. I walked out of the tent and saw him walking towards the trail that we came from earlier. "Blair, what are you doing?" I asked. "Get back to sleep before Dad finds out what you're doing." That was when I heard a noise coming from my parents' tent. I worried that I woke them up by basically yelling. I don't know how Blair got out of the tent without me noticing in the first place, but he kept walking until eventually, he was out of my sight. I ended up finding him off the trail a ways, thanks to my lantern, and he was sitting by the lake. I grabbed him by the arm and yanked him towards camp when all of a sudden, we saw a shadow. It was a man, and there was something really wrong with him. Like, seriously. He wasn't only just being a creep by staring at us, but he was clearly deranged. He was standing in the moonlight, and I could see him semi-clearly. He had long, dark hair that looked greasy and a creepy mustache. He also had some sort of tool in his hand that looked like a hammer. The way he was just standing there, all crusty looking and staring intensely, showed me enough. He was just sitting there, mouth breathing, and he was extremely pale. He looked like he hadn't showered in weeks. I didn't stay for another second or even bother to say a word to him. I mean, come on, I was pretty sure he was a murderer. Now the chase was on. Blair wasn't as fast as me and he could barely keep up. Keep in mind, he was only 9 or 10, so his little legs could only go so fast. I grabbed his arm and practically dragged him to make him go faster. The other problem that we had was we had to get past this man to get back to camp, so we legit had to make a detour and run in a circle around him. I don't know what we would have done if it wasn't dark or if we weren't already close to home. We were pretty sure that we lost him and eventually met up with Mom and Dad. They found us out a ways from camp. I guess we were heading in the wrong direction. We kind of got lost in the panic, I guess. You'll never guess what happened after that. When we arrived back at camp, my dad's truck was gone, the only vehicle that we had out there. That man baited us off camp and he stole the truck, broke into our tents, and stole my dad's wallet and phone. Luckily, we had a walkie-talkie to call for help. The police found my dad's truck and actually arrested the man a few days later. What if we would have been out further into the woods that night? That man would have been out further into the woods that night. That man would have caught us, no doubt about it. He chased us through the woods and tried to murder us or kidnap us, one of the two. When my dad got the truck back, unfortunately, it was totaled in a drunk driving incident by the man that stole it. Man, that trip was a nightmare. It all started on a rainy night. My dad had wanted me to babysit my little brothers while he went to the bar to play pool and drink. I'd gotten them to settle down for the night, and I decided to go order some food and chill, playing some CS while I waited. About 30 minutes had gone by and I was wondering why the hell my food was taking so long. I finally heard a knock on my door, and there was a rough-looking man who said he had my food. I tipped him and he went on his way. I closed the door and walked back to my computer, completely forgetting to lock it. If one of my protective friends hadn't said something while we were gaming, things might have gone a lot worse. Them asking to make sure I locked the door was a potential life-saving question, because in fact, I had completely forgotten to lock the door. To me, it wasn't the biggest deal at the time, but I'm glad they said something, and you'll see why here in a minute. I checked on the door to make sure it was locked, and of course, it wasn't. So I locked the door real quick and went back to gaming. My computer, by the way, was in my living room, and to the right of me was my kitchen. In the kitchen, there was a giant bay window facing directly into where I was sitting and gaming. I started eating my food while gaming, and I heard my front door knob jiggle. I thought maybe I was just scared and hallucinating it, since I was home alone and my brothers were asleep in bed, until my dog started barking at the front door. That was the exact moment I realized that something bad was happening. Whoever was there started banging and rattling the door handle. Freaked out, I ducked under the counter beside me, called my dad, and then called 911. While I was on the phone, my little brothers ran out of their room screaming that someone was standing outside their bedroom window, pointing towards the lock, and smiling and waving at them, trying to get them to open it for him. I completely lost it and started crying, but I had to hide my brothers in my room, in my closet, and I told them to not come out at all. I thought he was going to try the back door next, which was a glass door that he could have easily rocked back and forth to get the lock loose, or even just shattered the door completely. All it would really take to break it was an object to swing at it, like a metal bat or something. So I was freaking out. I grabbed a knife and waited for my dad and the police to show up for what felt like forever. I was scared that I was going to have to defend my little brothers and myself in a life or death scenario. I was only 13 at the time, so I was really scared. The cops finally showed up, and the person had disappeared. But every night after that, I was scared he would come back and we would finally meet. I have no idea if it was someone random or the Chinese food delivery driver from earlier. I just hoped he would never come back. Luckily, he never did, but that didn't stop me from being scared shitless every night, especially when I was home alone. It's especially creepy when you think about how us kids were alone. I think he knew that and he was trying to prey on us, but luckily he gave up. Hopefully, he heard me calling the police or something, and that's why he ran. I guess we'll never really know for sure. I work overnight at a warehouse a few miles out from my home. My schedule varies depending on the day, but I'm usually home between 4 and 6 in the morning. I was driving home from my exhausting shift, and all I could think about was getting in bed and passing out. I wasn't falling asleep behind the wheel, but I definitely wasn't fully awake either. I parked on the street in front of my house, walked in through the front door, then walked upstairs and fell into bed. It was one of those days where it just felt so good to be laying down. I was asleep in minutes. When I woke up, I was just as tired, if not more so. I wasn't even sure why I'd woken up in the first place. I rolled over and looked out the window, and it was still dark out, so it had to have been less than an hour since I got in bed. As I began to roll back over to sleep again, I noticed something that made me stop. My bedroom door was open. I stared at it for a good couple of seconds, just so confused by it. I never sleep with my door open. It always makes me feel uncomfortable. Coming home that day was a blur, though, so I couldn't actually remember closing the door, but it was just one of those things I knew I'd always do no matter what. I got up slowly and walked across the room. All the lights were off in the house, but I looked down the hallway outside my room as I closed the door. The second the door clicked, a sound came from the other side of the house. I don't know how to describe it, but it was like something moving for just a couple of seconds, then it stopped. My whole body froze, and I stood there for a minute listening for anything else. The silence was deafening now and only freaked me out more. I took a deep breath and opened the door again. In my head, I still didn't believe this was anything real. I was sure this was just me being scared over nothing, but I still wanted to check just to keep me from overthinking it. I walked across the hallway to the second bedroom, which was where I thought the sound had come from. The room only had a dresser and a bed in it, so there wasn't much to look around. I didn't see anything, so I started walking back until I heard a door in the hallway creaking open. I leaned over and saw a man stepping out of the closet between me and my bedroom. He was looking at me, and in that moment that we made eye contact, I recognized him. I quickly closed and locked the door to the room I was in, and I heard him run down the stairs and out of the house. Of course, I called 911 as soon as I was safe to go back to my room. The police said there were no signs of forced entry, so they said I must have left the front door unlocked. Again, I know I was tired, but that's just something I always do unconsciously, so I don't know if I can believe it. What scares me is that I know I had seen that man from somewhere before, but I have no idea where or when. It could have just been at the grocery store or walking through the city, but it all seems too coincidental. Also, I don't know how long he was inside my house for, but nothing was taken. I know he was likely the one to open my bedroom door while I was sleeping, though, which makes me really uneasy to even think about. He could have done anything or taken anything, but he didn't. Maybe when he opened my bedroom door, he recognized me too and decided not to do what he planned once he saw it was my house. It's all too hard to say, but I've been thinking about it non-stop for a while now, and I'm still paranoid. This happened in August of last year. I had taken a week off from work for a staycation at home. I had been living alone for the past few months after my roommate moved out, but I'd been working too much to really enjoy the space and freedom of living alone. This week was supposed to be my relaxing, me time that I never got to have. Unfortunately, it could not have been further from that. It was my second day off, and I was just chilling, watching TV, eating nice home-cooked meals, all of that kind of stuff, when I heard someone walk up to my front porch. It was midday, so I thought maybe the mailman or just some solicitor. But as I stayed sitting on the couch for a few minutes, I realized they still hadn't knocked or rang the doorbell. I never heard them walk away, so it got me curious. I got up and went over to the door to look out the peephole. Sure enough, someone was still on my porch. It was a man looking to be in his mid-30s, wearing a light sweatshirt and black jeans. He wasn't in front of the door, though. He was off to the side, looking around like he was searching for something. I thought of opening the door, but I was too nervous to confront him, so I just watched. After 40 seconds, the guy walked away quickly and got into a parked car on the road by my neighbor's house. Once I saw him drive away, I went out to investigate. Everything looked normal to me, at least everything in the area the man was looking around. I went back inside and mostly forgot about it. Within the hour, I took a nap, then made dinner a few hours later, and finally turned on a movie to finish off the night with. Sometime in the middle of it, there was a knock at the door. I paused the movie and went to see who it was. It was that man from earlier, this time standing in front of the door and seeming to be waiting for me to answer. I cracked the door open just enough to talk through. "Hey, I was hoping you'd help me out with something." I'd ask someone else, but nobody would answer, the man said right away with a big smile. "What do you need?" I asked. He went on to tell me this elaborate story about his car. Breaking down right next to my house, he pointed at it, and I immediately knew it was the same car I saw him drive away in earlier. Then he said all he needed was to use my phone to make a quick call. Knowing this was some sort of scam or something, I denied him right away and closed the door. I then looked through the peephole to make sure he left, but he didn't. His face grew excessively angry, and he banged on the door again. I yelled through the door that I'd call the cops if he didn't leave. He stood and thought for a moment, then hurried off, but not to his car. He walked around to the left side of the house. Fearing this was going to escalate, I dialed 911 and told them about the situation. Thank God I did, because not even a minute later, a sudden crash came from the dining room. I ran over to see what it was and saw that he'd smashed the window and was crawling through it. I tried to run for the garage to get in my car, but the man was quick, chasing me down half the house before grabbing me and holding me still. I fought back, kicking and punching, but he completely overpowered me. He told me through his clenched jaw to be quiet and insisted that I stop fighting while he dragged me to the front door and opened it. Once I knew what he was doing, I only started fighting harder. As he tried to bring me closer to his car, someone walking their dog on the other side of the road saw us and came running over. Before he even reached us, the man let go of me and sprinted to his car and drove away. It all happened so fast. Once the police arrived, they helped calm me down and got all the information I could give them. Apparently, it wasn't enough, though. He was never found. What's creepier is that the police think the first time I saw him come by wasn't actually his first time. They think I may have caught him collecting some sort of camera or mic he'd set up on my house to spy on me. He hasn't been back that I know of, but I plan to move out anyway just to be safe. Whatever his plan was, I don't want to risk finding out. I live in a townhome in the middle of a relatively small city. It's very small and outdated, but I live alone, so it's the best I can afford. I worked late this night, getting home sometime around 8 or 9. Pulling up my shared driveway, I noticed the townhome connected to mine had its front door wide open. All the lights in the house were off, though, which made me think they must have accidentally left it open and then gone to sleep. I made fun of them in my head and went inside my house, not thinking much else about it. I got out some frosted flakes and ate while watching Netflix, then forced myself to go to bed because I had to be up early for my morning shift tomorrow. Going to my bedroom, which happened to have a connecting wall to my neighbors, I heard a few thumps come from inside their place. My neighbors usually don't make any noise, so hearing anything from them was a rare occurrence. I just hoped they wouldn't keep me up and turned off the lights and hopped in bed. I laid there with my eyes closed for several minutes, trying to drift into sleep when the most terrifying sound instantly shook me up, my front door being smashed in. It was a single violent hit. I jumped out of bed and ran into the hallway. There was wood debris all over the floor, and the front door was wide open. But whoever did it must have been moving quickly because they weren't there. I heard some footsteps running through the living room, and at this point, I could tell there was more than one person. I tried to run back to my bedroom, but a man screamed at me to stop. I turned to face two large men, both wearing masks and hoodies. One was holding a baseball bat, and the other held some sort of metal ramming tool, which must have been used to bust open the door. This next part was chaotic as they yelled commands at me and forced me to the ground. I didn't even try to fight back because I knew it would only put me in more danger. One of them held me down aggressively, pressing my head on the floor, while the other went around the house and shoved stuff in his backpack. I was panicking, breathing heavily, and trying to convince them to get off me and just let me stay out of their way. I probably should have just shut up and stayed quiet, but it was hard to think straight. Somewhere around 2 to 3 minutes in, the man that was grabbing stuff came running back to the hallway, yelling at me and the other guy about something outside. The man got off me and ran over to the window. Then they both came running back and pushed me down as I was trying to get up. They looked full of rage as they started attacking and threatening me before trying to run out the back door, but they were too late. For cops had surrounded the house, and seconds later, they forced the men to give up. As it turns out, the men broke into my neighbor's townhome too. They weren't home at the time, but when they pulled in, they immediately called the cops, which was how they were able to help me. The two men turned out to be just regular guys trying to make some quick money. Aside from the smashed front door and a few bruises, I was all right. I still think it was stupid of them to attack me instead of just making a run for it at the end, but I'm sure either way they were screwed. It was by far the most terrifying thing I'd ever been through, but I'm extremely lucky to have had it end up the way it did, with them in prison. I've worked in manual labor my entire life, but I took a gig hauling trucks for a few years in the early 2000s. I got an offer for a package that I couldn't refuse in the way of full-time pay with part-time hours if I could meet the arrival times. I got insurance benefits, everything an employee dreams about. I got my commercial driver's license as well as a few other certifications, and found myself on the road just a month or so later. I had a lot of jobs where things got weird or just crazy, but one particular evening makes the others pale in comparison. I don't like stories with a lot of fluff, so I'm just going to jump right into it. I was on a return trip from Oregon to Minnesota. I had already made one delivery, hooked up a second, and was now technically on my way home. This was about the halfway point. Weather was great, I was feeling good and motivated. My time on that trip was well ahead of schedule, so I made sure not to push it or burn myself out. I found it super defeating to get home from a long haul and be too exhausted to enjoy it. It's always better to take a little time and stay level. I also have a bit of a heart condition, so heavy caffeine intake isn't an option for me. Most of my life has been all natural, using whatever remedy I could come up with to keep my energy up. The biggest influence was just a good diet, exercise, and a consistent sleep schedule. That means I stopped every night generally at the same time, got a good amount of rest, and that's it. Many of my trips were clocked to the very last second, but I managed to always arrive on time. I passed over the Idaho border and started gunning through Montana. Lots of beauty, but ultimately not much in the way of civilization out there. The route took me through Missoula and some more established townships. Between them, though, you'd be lucky to find a service station of any kind. Rural stretches like this always kept me on my toes as I'd heard horror stories about guys running out of gas, blowing tires, or encountering engine trouble. There isn't help for 75 miles in each direction. On top of that, some of these rural stretches don't see a lot of traffic. Some early mornings, I wouldn't see another car on the road for an hour at a time. I had my eyes set on a trucking station out in the middle of nowhere between Bozeman and Livingston. I'd roll through Bozeman around dinner time, grab a quick bite to eat, then push on towards the station. I'd let my food settle and digest a bit. After an hour of driving, I'd hit my target, pull over, and be totally ready for bed. I liked routine, structure, and having a plan. That night, everything was supposed to be simple. At first, it was. My plan was going smoothly. I got dinner, gassed up, experienced little to no traffic, and was back on the road in no time. Soon, I found my head swimming from the digestion and long day of driving. But there it was, some lights out there alongside the highway. You know exactly what I'm talking about, those big concrete pullouts on the side of interstates every 100 miles or so. They usually have a bathroom, vending machine, trash cans, everything people living on the road might need. I pulled in and found a rare sight, not a single vehicle anywhere. No one was using this rest station, and I liked that. There's a kind of security in being solo, if that makes sense. I let the truck cool down, locked everything up, then crawled into the living space in the back. My area was very simple, a bed, small table attached to the wall, and an overhead shelf to store most of my belongings. I also had a little makeshift power cell which I used to charge a portable flip DVD player that had both the player and the screen. It was one of those inventions of the 2000s that could have only been popular then. I settled in with my big blankets and pillows and watched one of my favorites, Resident Evil or Reign of Fire, an action thriller of some kind. Despite the shooting and explosions, I fell asleep just after 30 minutes. I closed the DVD player and surrendered to the darkness inside my cab. It must have only been a couple hours later when something woke me up. I couldn't place it, but I knew something jarred me. I have a habit of snoring occasionally, and when I do, I sometimes wake myself up with one of those louder rips. I thought maybe that's what happened, so I snuggled in for a few more hours of sleep. I like to hit the road before sunrise and get those extra miles in before the rest of the world wakes up. Just as I closed my eyes though, I heard it, the sound that woke me up. It wasn't a snore like I thought, but the abruptness of a cough. It came from somewhere beyond the cab, outside in the parking lot. It sounded partially muffled, maybe another trucker had pulled in and I just simply hadn't heard the rumble. Really didn't seem that likely, but I guess anything is possible, right? I wanted to be sure of what I heard, so I turned on the small overhead light. The second that flicked on, I could hear shoes slapping the asphalt and the sound of someone running away. As I listened, the footsteps faded a bit. The person was running away from my truck. They must have seen the light come on and reacted to that. But at this point, I'm now on high alert. I turned the light off so as not to give away my position within the truck. As long as it's dark, it's almost impossible to see in the depth of the sleeping cab, so I used that to my advantage. Looking out, I surveyed the parking lot and found something unusual, an older van parked across the lot, sitting angled so the broadside faced my windshield. Definitely weird, as I was 100% alone when I pulled in originally. That parking lot was empty. I tried to be reasonable though. Maybe he was walking his dog, having a smoke. Whatever the case, the person was likely a long-haul traveler just like myself. The guy was probably stretching his legs, doing a few laps of the parking lot when he accidentally woke me up. Once he saw the light, he realized that he made a mistake, then hightailed it back to his van. It really wasn't the most out-of-the-ordinary thing to happen at a truck stop. With a little apprehension, I let everything go and didn't investigate it any further. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't fall back asleep. Just as I started to drift off, I heard those footsteps again, and then what I thought sounded like someone tugging on the passenger side door handle. There was an unmistakable click, then the sway of someone stepping off the sidebar. Whoever I'd heard coughing was just trying to get inside my truck. At this point, all my alarms are going off in my head, and that structured, well-planned part of my brain is now scrambling. For whatever reason, and a lot of my friends have given me flack for it over the years, I didn't carry a gun on these truck hauls. I did have a short club that I used to check my tire pressure, and that was a great second option. At this point, I believed my best choice was to nut up and confront whoever was milling around the parking lot, let them know that my truck wasn't public property. All at once, I threw the passenger door open and clicked my flashlight on. I had a small, steady streamlight that could reach something like 30 yards, not with the puffy yellow flare of a cheap flashlight, but with a white, concentrated light. I swept it back and forth, saw nothing, so I started inspecting the truck and the trailer. I saw nothing at first glance, so I hopped down and did a full lap of the rig. Still nothing, not even underneath it. Only one option left now, time to go look at that van. I swept the flashlight around and started marching up to the rear. I wanted to see the license plate before I checked it out any further. As I went to eye the back of the bumper, I brought my light up so I could see. My eyes naturally went to the license plate, which was from South Dakota, but something else caught my attention. I couldn't place it at first, but as I kept looking, it all came into focus. Below the back of the van, near the far back tire, there was a pair of boots. Someone was crouched and hiding on the other side of it. Only the toe tips poked out, but it was enough for me to see what was going on. I left the light on the boots for 10 to 20 seconds, long enough for them to realize that they were exposed. I watched in disbelief as the boots slowly shuffled backward until they were completely hidden behind the tire. My stomach soured at the whole thing. This person clearly had ill intentions, and I wanted nothing to do with them. I wanted to say something, but I found myself completely speechless. I'm not confrontational. You may have gleaned that from my lack of a firearm. I didn't want to issue a threat to someone who might have the upper hand. I just backed up until I reached my truck, hopped in, and locked the door. I figured that encounter was enough. I got out and found them, who would come up and keep messing with me. We both knew what was going on at this point, so the mystery was completely over. Just some vagrant weirdo looking to make a score. Now that he knew the truck wasn't abandoned, I hoped that he would just move on. I sat for 45 minutes, and that van never moved. I didn't see anything move. No person, no door opening or closing. It's like they were still hiding behind that rear passenger tire. As the morning went on, though, sleep came and kissed me, and I knew I needed to get at least a couple more hours of rest if I wanted to have a successful day. My eyes started to droop, and soon I was snoozing. The sound that woke me this time was clear, loud, and right outside the door. It was the sound of a man clearing his throat, the sound someone makes when they want your attention. My eyes shot up, and I moved to the glass, and there, just peeking over the lip of the door, I can see someone looking into my cab. I freeze, hoping they can't see me, but it doesn't matter. This guy's eyes are rolling back and forth, taking it all in, looking for whoever is inside. He looks crazy, like he'd given himself a haircut with a butter knife. Some of it was shaved, some of it was long, and I could see nicks along his scalp. I think his eyebrows were shaved off too, but it was hard to tell in the moonlight. I could literally feel this guy pulling on the door handle, making the entire truck move. I did the only thing that I could think of, shout as loud as I could. What do you want? I hollered at the glass, still motionless in the back of the cab. This is also a censored conversation, as I remember swearing in literally every sentence that I spoke to this guy. He said, "It's me." "Who?" I asked. Okay, maybe this was a case of a mix-up. I sat up and reached for the club on the floor. "It's Henry, come on," he pleaded. "I don't know you. I'm not from here. Now please just get away from my truck," I explained to him. The conversation devolved from that point forward. Playing hard to get. I like it. "Let's do something different," he said. This guy went on at length about what he wanted to do to me. None of it involved violence at all. Everything this guy said was sexual from start to finish. I'm watching this guy lick the window of my semi as he tells me he wants to kiss my feet, worship me, pleasure every part of me. I'm not homophobic, but the whole thing was nauseating. As he's going on and on and on about his sexual fantasies, transitioning into what he wants me to do to him, I'm yelling for him to just please go away. Throughout the entire thing, his tone changes. He starts talking about his desires, which were much more violent. This guy wanted someone to hurt him during their sexual escapades, punched, choked, tied up, and abused, the whole shebang. I couldn't really believe what I was hearing. He switched from licking the window to tapping on it before finally smashing his fist into the glass. I had to do something. I remembered my portable DVD player and, for whatever reason, came up with this weird little plan. I opened it up and faced it away from the front of the cab so the light would illuminate my face, but he wouldn't be able to see what the light was coming from. "I'm calling the police," I said, hoping the light source would look like a car phone or a radio. "I've got your South Dakota plates too." "Nathan?" he asked. "I'm not who you're looking for." "Now get the hell out of here, man," was the last thing that I ever said to this person. I watched him leap down and start running all in one swift motion. The van fired up and, without even turning its headlights on, fled from the parking lot like a bat out of hell. Honestly, I ended up doing the same. After another inspection of the trailer and tires to make sure everything was secure, I rolled out and made for Livingston. That morning, I really played with the idea of calling the police and making some kind of report, but thought it would be more trouble than it was actually worth. I didn't have the actual plate number, just that it was a Dakota van, so I figured my report would go absolutely nowhere. It wasn't until I got out of trucking that I realized how common this type of encounter was, especially after the invention of Craigslist. Truck stops have always been known for midnight rendezvous, but became explicit for random hookups all over the country, particularly for traveling men who wanted to experiment. Whoever that Henry guy was, he thought I was Richard, who was probably another trucker rolling through Montana that night. Henry must have gotten the truck station mixed up, or Richard was late to the arrival, so he got us confused. Regardless and whatever the case, I'm very glad that I had my doors locked that night, as I could be telling a very different story right now. Have a plan when you hit the road and always stick to that plan. When I was 18, I was very immature and naive. I was kind of a jerk when I was on the road, honking whenever I got impatient, borderline cutting people off. Looking back now, it was very stupid. If I ever have kids, I'll be that much more strict with them as far as their driving. That being said, I did drive a lot for someone my age. I went away to school 5 hours away from home. No matter what day of the week, traffic always gets atrocious the closer I get to home. So during breaks, I'll drive home at night to avoid this. What goes from a 4 to 5 hour drive down to a 3-hour drive? It was the beginning of winter break as the fall semester just ended. All my friends left for home on the same day. I just waited till later on in the night to head out because there's nothing I hate more than traffic. I used to drive a Mazda 3 that I would beat the ever-living crap out of, and admittedly, I used to be known for driving my car to a near-empty tank consistently. People would comment on it whenever they'd be in the car with me, and I'd always assure them that the car would still have at least 30 miles to go even after the needle would hit E. I found out the night I was driving home from school that I was wrong. I was only like an hour into my drive on the interstate. The needle was on E, and I was pushing my luck waiting for a gas station sign instead of looking up the nearest one on the map. The car started making these weird sounds suddenly and jolting, and that's when I realized I may have actually run the tank empty this time. I got off the first exit ramp and hoped it would lead right to a gas station. This exit was dark though, with no street lights, and there were just woods on either side. I was scared to slow down and lose my speed because I didn't know if I'd have enough gas to find a gas station. I blew through the stop sign at the end of the ramp and made a sharp left turn on the intersecting road, which was another dark road surrounded by woods. I was screwed. The car eventually came to a stop, and the engine died. Things only got worse when I took out my phone and saw I had no bars. I have T-Mobile, which is the worst possible reception anywhere far from a major city. I tried calling 911 because I was stupid and thought that 911 works even without reception. Of course, it didn't. I was terrified because I didn't know what to do. I turned on my hazard lights and just waited for someone to pass by. It was a long time before I saw headlights approaching. When I did, I flashed my headlights at them, and they passed me, made a U-turn, then pulled up on the grass behind me. I didn't know who was getting out of that car, though, and I was an 18-year-old defenseless girl. I just cracked the window down a little bit as this man approached my car. I told him I needed help. I ran out of gas. He offered to give me a ride to the nearest gas station. He was this bald guy with glasses on. He kind of looked trustworthy. I had no other apparent options but to accept his offer. I got out of the car and followed him to his car, making sure to lock my doors first. His car was a black Honda, year probably a 2010. It smelled funky in his car. I couldn't pin what the smell could be, though. He banged another U-turn and started driving in the direction he was driving before. He made conversation with me, asking where I was from and basic questions. I was honest with him that I was driving home from school. He said he lived in the area and that they don't get too many out-of-towners getting off the interstate for this quiet little town. The route we were taking lacked any buildings anywhere. It was just woods everywhere. I asked if he knew of any gas stations, and he said yeah, just a ways up the road. I started hearing bumping and thumping coming from the back of the vehicle. It sounded like the trunk. At first, I thought it was maybe just bumps in the road or a loose object in the trunk. He seemed to keep talking like he wouldn't stop. Finally, we got to a sort of town-looking area. There were some lights and buildings at last, a diner, and a few small houses. There was a red light at the first intersection since I got in his car. We came to a stop, and for the first time, there was silence. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of someone screaming in the trunk, followed by thumps and bangs. I looked at the man, who looked at me. In a split second, I unbuckled my seatbelt, opened the door, and ran while at the same time, he tried grabbing me and pulling me back into the car. I heard him get out as well, but instead of chasing me, he ran to close his passenger side door. Then I heard him floor it down the street. I ran into the diner and asked for help, making a scene. I used their phone to call 911. I waited there, and it became this whole huge thing with multiple police showing up to the diner to take a report. Given the gravity of the report that I was making, that I heard someone in the trunk of the car, they had to get every last detail from me about the man's car, his appearance, and where he picked me up. I was also given a ride back to my car so that they could also include the pickup location in the report. They also helped me get a hold of AAA, which eventually would come to my location to fill my car with gas. This was overall the scariest experience of my life. I was shaken to the core the whole rest of the ride home. I hope they found that man. I hope whoever was in that trunk is still alive today. For all I know, that man could have been bringing me to his house or somewhere else, and I was just lucky I had a chance to get out at that red light. I live in Burke County, North Carolina, in Morganton. I'm used to the quiet lifestyle that comes with living in a rural place. You get some weird characters here and there, but it's usually nothing too bad. I own a nice plot of land with my husband. My work schedule fluctuates. Sometimes I work days, sometimes I work nights. This happened on a night that I was on my way home after a night shift, so it had to be like 4 a.m. My phone was almost dead. I was hungry. I was tired, and I just wanted to get some food and head home. I stopped at the gas station to get $10 worth of gas and also a packaged sandwich, which I proceeded to eat inside the gas station cafe. Some sketchy guy was eyeing me for a little until he left the building without buying anything. After eating, I went outside to fill up the gas and then got back in the car. The smell of gas was extra pungent for some reason. These roads are very dark and twisty at night, so I was driving slow, especially since I was tired after a long day of work. Then something unexpected happened. The needle on the gas gauge suddenly dropped to E, and the low gas light came on and beeped. I had no idea what was going on. I'm not a car person and I'd never run out of gas before this. Plus, the needle just suddenly dropped. I thought at first that the computer was glitching, so I pulled over and restarted the car, but the needle was still on E. I tried to continue driving, but the engine died. I started having a panic attack. I called my husband first thing, and thank God he picked up. I asked him how did my car run out of gas after I just filled up, and as I got out of the car, I smelt gasoline. I told him this, and he said it sounds like I have a leak. He told me he'd head right over and he'd call our roadside assistance company. But then I heard a car coming with no headlights, and suddenly it stopped not far behind my car. I suddenly thought to bring up that sketchy guy who was watching me at the gas station and asked my husband if there was a chance he did something to my car. My husband's tone suddenly changed to sounding more concerned and worried. He said yes, there's a chance that he may have cut my fuel line. I didn't know what that meant. All I knew was I needed to run. I took my keys out of the ignition and shut the door and locked it so that the headlights would turn off. My phone was on like 2%, so I told him to text me when he's close. I ran off the road and towards the first house I could find. I ran down the long driveway and up the property to the front door. All the lights in the house were off. I still rang the bell multiple times anyway. Eventually, a light turned on and then the door opened. A man in his 60s opened the door. He looked like he was just woken up. I asked him to let me in to hide and charge my phone. After a bit of explaining, he opened the door fully and let me in. I asked him for an iPhone charger, and he said he'd go look for one, then asked me to take a seat in the living room. I sat down, still in my nurse scrubs, feeling a mix of emotions. The man called out from the kitchen asking me if I wanted some water. I said yes, please. Little did he know, I saw his reflection in a mirror in the living room that gave visibility into the kitchen. I saw him fill a cup with water, then I know for a fact I saw him drop something into the water. He walked out of view of the mirror, but the faucet was still running. It ran for a solid 30 more seconds before he turned it off. He came back into the living room with a glass of water and handed it to me. I thanked him, and he sat down and just looked at me, then asked me to explain the situation again. I replied to him, I just really need a charger so that I could contact my husband. He said all right and went upstairs. I checked my phone, and it was on 1%. I used that remaining battery to send my current location to my husband just in case. I then smelt the glass of water, and although it didn't smell like anything, I knew he put something in it. Now I had to make the decision of whether I should leave or not. On one hand, I needed to charge my phone badly. On the other, I was 99% sure he did something to this water. I heard him walking back down the stairs, and he said he doesn't have any iPhone chargers since he has an Android. After he said this, I got up and walked straight for the door. I'm not an idiot. Once outside, I ran back down the driveway to the road. I felt like throwing up. I couldn't believe two separate potential incidents from two different men happened in one night. I crept along the side of the road behind the trees. I took out my phone and sent my updated location, and right around now was when my battery died. I waited until I saw the familiar headlights of my husband's truck. I went out waving my arms, and thank God it was him. I got inside the truck and let all my emotions out, crying to him about what I just went through. He brought us to my car, and there was no longer a car behind mine. My back window was shattered, though, and it appeared someone had gotten into the back seat, but nothing of high value was left in my car to steal anyway. My car battery was also now dead. When I told my husband about the man who tried to potentially drug me, he was so furious he wanted to go break down his door. But I told him no, let's just wait for the tow truck to come. We waited quite a while before it came. My car was towed to my dealership, where they would take the car in the next day. My husband was right. My car was vandalized, and the fuel line was cut completely. Thank God I was off the next few days because I needed some time to mentally recover from this night. The idea that twice in one night I was almost a victim of some sketchy men, I just couldn't get over. This happened way back in 2006. I was 17 and living in Uvalde, Texas, a very low-income neighborhood, the kind you'll find sprawled out all over the place in rural Texas when you're not right outside of a city. The closest city to me was San Antonio. I was going to some local community college because that's all my parents could afford for me. One of my best friends from high school, Bodie, moved to San Antonio to go to San Antonio College. He was living in some small apartment a little outside of the city with a roommate. His girlfriend would also often stay with him. Since the city is only really an hour and a half away, I would visit him all the time. He invited me this one weekend to come crash for the night, so I took my trusty old 1995 Toyota pickup truck. Just kidding. The thing was a piece of crap. The gas gauge didn't even work on it. I'd have to always just keep track of when the last time I filled the tank up was, then reset the trip mileage. I took Route 90, which was a straight shot from Uvalde to San Antonio. I was on the road at like 2:40 p.m. on a Friday, and there was no traffic at all. I got to Bodie at a reasonable time. His girlfriend wouldn't be getting there until tomorrow, so tonight we were going to go out. We stopped at a liquor store and drank in his apartment for a while with his roommate. Then the three of us went to this dive bar that would kind of look the other way with fake IDs. That was basically our night. We got back to their apartment around 2 a.m. after getting food. I slept on the couch. The next day would have almost been the same thing, but Bodhi and his girlfriend were having issues all day. As the two of them got drunker as the night progressed, she started yelling at him in front of me, and it got really awkward and uncomfortable. I didn't really have much to drink that day because I was already iffy about staying the night with her there. I eventually decided I would just head back home. I said goodbye to everyone and started my journey home. It was very late at night. I want to guess midnight, maybe a little earlier. Route 90 was deserted at this time, so I would fly for my pickup standards. But suddenly, the engine started sputtering. I felt my heart completely drop as I realized I forgot to fill up the tank. I slowed down, but it was too late. The engine cut. I pulled to the side of the road and tried starting it a few times, but it did no good. I took out my cell phone, which was equally as shitty as my truck, and tried to get a signal. No shot. I couldn't even call for help. I had to just put my hazards on and hope a good Samaritan would pass. You wouldn't believe how long I sat on the side of the road before seeing headlights. I waved my arms as the car approached, but it zoomed past me, ignoring me. This happened again after another 10 minutes or so. I was starting to feel hopeless, like maybe I should just sleep in my car and wait till sunrise to get help. So that's what I was going to do. I got inside my car, took the key out of the ignition to cut the battery, and just angled my seat back to go to sleep. I would hear the occasional car zooming past, like once every 10 minutes, but it didn't feel worth waving people down in the dark. It seemed sketchy for myself and to the people in the cars. But when I was starting to actually drift away to sleep, a car door closing from behind me woke me up. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a car pulled up behind me with its headlights off. I turned around now to get a better look. There was some big pickup truck, but I couldn't see anyone inside of it, nor did I see anyone outside of it. Maybe someone pulled over to help. I got out of the car and said, "Excuse me," to no response. I walked closer to the truck just to confirm no one was inside. Then I walked back to my car. This was weird. I looked towards the trees on the side of the road. Maybe someone was pissing in the woods. I went back inside my car and locked the door. This was just too weird. Suddenly, there was a tap at my window. I jumped. I looked to see a man looking down at me into the car, smiling. I didn't do anything yet. He said, "Hey, buddy, need a hand?" I lowered the window a crack and said, "Hey, I ran out of gas." The man said, "That's quite the predicament. Step out and give me a hand with this real quick." When he said this, I thought he meant help him with a gas jug to fill up my tank or something, honestly. So I stepped out of the truck and shut the door, expecting him to lead me to his truck. But he stood there, looked down at me because he was much taller, still smiling, and said, "I need you to empty your pockets, please." It took me a second to process what he meant. I was literally a broke college student driving a piece of pickup truck. I wasn't about to get robbed of the only cash I had in my phone. I ran for it in the direction of the trees. I'm small but fast. I turned around and saw he was chasing after me. Once I made it into the trees, I zigzagged all over the place until I seemed to lose him. Then I crouched behind a big tree to catch my breath. When I heard him approaching closer, I quieted my breath. I heard him say out loud, "I'll kill you, you piece of." I don't know if he was just saying it out loud out of anger or if he wanted me to hear it, but I was too scared to move. Even after I heard his footsteps move away, I didn't move. In fact, I stayed in this position the rest of the night, eventually laying behind this big tree up until dawn. I went back over to the highway to my truck, and the truck behind me was gone, but my truck's doors were both open. I found that my glove box had been gone through and completely emptied of anything somewhat valuable. My flannel hoodie was also taken, which had something in the pocket, I'm sure. I finally managed to wave down a good Samaritan, and he gave me a ride to the closest gas station. I bought a fuel can, filled it with gas, and the man brought me back to my car, where I filled my tank just enough to drive the truck to a gas station to fill up completely. Then I went straight home. This was a real-life learning experience for me, that there are bad people out there who will try to take advantage of you when you're in a vulnerable spot. But there are also good people, like the man who helped me. Our first story takes place under the unforgiving glare of the desert sun. Miles and miles of sand stretch in every direction, baking under the intense heat. Imagine finding yourself stranded in this desolate landscape, the silence broken only by the wind whistling through the dunes. This is the nightmare that became a reality for one unfortunate traveler. He had been driving for hours, the monotony of the road lulling him into a false sense of security. He had ignored the gas gauge, its needle dipping dangerously low, too focused on reaching his destination. Then it happened. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died, leaving him in stunned silence. He was stranded miles from civilization, the nearest town nothing more than a dot on a map he'd hastily consulted hours ago. Panic began to set in, a cold dread creeping up his spine as the gravity of the situation sunk in. The sun beat down relentlessly, the heat radiating off the sand making the air shimmer. He had a meager supply of water, a granola bar, and the clothes on his back. Hope, it seemed, was in short supply. Days turned into a desperate struggle for survival. The relentless sun sapped his energy, the scorching sand burned his skin. He rationed his water, each sip a precious commodity, but dehydration was a constant threat. The vastness of the desert mocked him, a desolate wasteland stretching endlessly towards the horizon. As darkness fell, the desert transformed into a chilling tableau. Gone was the oppressive heat, replaced by a bone-chilling cold that cut through his thin clothing. The silence was broken only by the howl of the wind, a mournful sound that echoed his growing despair. He huddled in his car, a meager shelter against the elements, with fear as his only companion. Days turned into nights, each one blurring into the next, a terrifying cycle of scorching days and freezing nights. His hope dwindled with each passing hour, replaced by a gnawing fear that he wouldn't make it out alive. He had become a prisoner of the desert, trapped in a desolate wasteland with no escape. One day, while stumbling through the sand, his vision blurred from dehydration, he spotted something in the distance. Was it a mirage, a cruel trick of his exhausted mind? As he stumbled closer, his heart pounding in his chest, he realized with a surge of hope that it was a road, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the desolate landscape. With renewed determination, he dragged his weary body towards the road, each step a victory against the relentless grip of the desert. As he finally reached the roadside, he collapsed, his body spent, his spirit broken but not extinguished. He had escaped the clutches of the desert, a survivor of a terrifying ordeal. His story serves as a chilling reminder of the unforgiving nature of the desert, a place where running out of gas can be a matter of life and death. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the will to survive, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Our next story takes us from the desolate expanse of the desert to the claustrophobic darkness of a dense forest. Imagine the towering trees, their branches intertwined overhead, creating a canopy that blots out the moon and stars. The air is thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, a symphony of rustling leaves and the snapping of twigs. It's a place of eerie beauty, but also one that can hide unspeakable horrors. A young woman driving home from a late-night shift found herself lost on a deserted road cutting through the heart of such a forest. She had taken a wrong turn, lured off the main highway by a faulty GPS signal. Now she was hopelessly lost, her phone showing no bars, and her car sputtering its last breaths as it ran out of gas. The engine died, plunging her into an oppressive silence broken only by the sound of her own ragged breathing. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped her heart. The forest, once beautiful, now loomed around her, menacing and alive. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig sounded like approaching footsteps. She knew staying in her car was her safest bet, but the silence of the forest was unbearable, a suffocating blanket of darkness pressing in on her. She turned on her hazard lights, their blinking a beacon of hope in the vast darkness, but the battery quickly drained, leaving her once again in darkness. Time crawled by, each minute an eternity. She dozed off, only to be jolted awake by nightmares fueled by her isolation and fear. The forest came alive with every gust of wind, the shadows seeming to dance and writhe, taking on menacing shapes in the darkness. Then she heard it, a low growl, deep and guttural, coming from the woods surrounding her car. Her blood ran cold, her heart pounding against her ribs like a drum. She strained to listen, her senses on high alert, every muscle in her body tense with fear. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the distinct sound of heavy footsteps crunching on leaves. Something was out there, something big and dangerous, circling her car like a predator stalking its prey. She locked the doors, her fingers trembling as she fumbled with the lock. She huddled in the back seat, her eyes wide with terror, her breath catching in her throat. The growls continued throughout the night, each one sending shivers down her spine. She was trapped, hunted by an unseen terror in the heart of the forest. As dawn broke, the growls finally ceased, replaced by the chirping of birds, a jarring contrast to the nightmare she had just endured. She cautiously got out of the car, her legs shaking, her body trembling with exhaustion and terror. She didn't waste any time. With a desperate prayer, she started walking, her eyes scanning the dense undergrowth and her ears straining for any sound that might signal the return of her unseen tormentor. After what felt like an eternity, she stumbled out of the woods and onto a dirt road. A pickup truck soon approached, its driver stopping to help. She had escaped the clutches of the forest, but the terror of that night, the memory of the unseen growls, would forever haunt her dreams. Our final story takes us to a desolate stretch of highway, a ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through a barren landscape. This is not a road frequented by travelers. The few gas stations that dotted its length had long since been abandoned, their pumps dry and their windows boarded up like hollow eyes staring out at the emptiness. A young couple, eager for a weekend getaway, found themselves stranded on this forgotten highway. Their car sputtered its last as the gas gauge hit empty. They had ignored the warning signs, the lack of other cars, the eerie silence that hung heavy in the air, too caught up in their own excitement to heed these signs. Now, they were stranded. The sun beat down on the cracked asphalt, the air thick with the smell of dust and despair. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. They were alone, utterly alone, in a place that felt forgotten by time. They decided to walk, hoping to find help, a glimmer of hope in this desolate landscape. Mile after mile, they walked, the sun beating down on them relentlessly. Their throats were parched, their energy draining with each step. The highway stretched out before them, an endless ribbon of asphalt leading nowhere. As they walked, they noticed something strange, cars abandoned on the roadside, seemingly frozen in time. Some were old and rusted, others surprisingly new, their paint still gleaming under the harsh sun. Each car was eerily empty, their interiors undisturbed, as if their occupants had vanished into thin air. Fear, primal and instinctive, began to creep into their hearts. The silence of the highway was no longer just unnerving, it was oppressive, heavy with an unseen menace. They quickened their pace, their eyes darting nervously at the abandoned vehicles, their minds conjuring up terrifying scenarios. As dusk approached, casting long eerie shadows across the highway, they stumbled upon a small town. Relief washed over them, a beacon of civilization in this desolate wasteland. But as they approached, their relief turned to horror. The town was deserted, buildings stood empty, their windows dark and lifeless. The streets were eerily silent, not a single soul in sight. It was as if the entire town had simply vanished, leaving behind an unsettling silence that spoke volumes. They pressed on, desperation fueling their steps, their senses on high alert and their hearts pounding in their chests. The town was like a ghost town, frozen in time, its silence amplifying their growing fear. As darkness fell, they came to a crossroads. In the fading light, they saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. Relief flooded them, a glimmer of hope in this desolate landscape. They called out, but the figure remained motionless, its back to them. As they drew closer, their hearts sank. The figure was a scarecrow, its straw-stuffed body dressed in tattered clothing, its painted face twisted into a grotesque grin. It was a cruel joke, a symbol of their isolation and despair. They collapsed on the roadside, their bodies spent, their spirits broken. They were trapped in a nightmare, a desolate highway populated by abandoned cars and ghost towns. Their hope, once a flickering flame, now threatened to be extinguished by overwhelming despair. Looks like there's a storm approaching. I glanced out the window of the car and looked behind us as my fiancée, Kiva, came out of the shop with a bag of snacks for our trip. The sky looked gray just a few feet behind us down the road. I heard low rumbling as Kiva opened the driver's side door and got in. "Do you think the roads will get bad?" I asked her. She glanced behind us for a few seconds before turning on the engine. The 80s station we had been listening to on our road trip turned on, and the music filled the car as Kiva pulled out of the gas station parking lot. "We can always pull over if they do," she replied. "Don't you think we should fill up on gas soon?" I asked. "I think we should be fine for now." I glanced over at the dashboard. "There's a quarter of a tank left," I noted. "Babe, it's fine. Trust me. You worry too much. Besides, that's more than a quarter." I sighed as I tried not to let it bug me. I hated getting lower than half a tank in my own car, it stressed me out to no end. We pulled out onto the road, and I grabbed my phone. As I opened the weather app, I looked at the forecast for the day, sunny with a high of 95. That couldn't be right. I made sure that I had cell service before opening the app again, thinking that maybe it would refresh. It didn't, and the forecast still said the same. Huh, I said. That's weird. What's weird? Kiva asked. I looked in the side mirror at the darkening skies behind me. The clouds were catching up to us quickly. Melanie, I glanced back at Kiva. The weather app says it's supposed to be sunny today. Maybe the app is down. Yeah, maybe, I replied. We continued down the road and stopped at a red light. I shifted in my seat so I could look behind us at the approaching storm. I could see the dark clouds moving across the sky, heading directly towards us. I turned back to face the road ahead of us when suddenly the sound of thunder boomed across the sky. I jumped as it was followed by a flash of lightning. All of a sudden, a scream erupted behind us. What was that? Kiva asked. Oh my God, what the? Someone yelled. The people in the cars around us began to roll down their windows to get a better view of whatever was happening. Kiva shifted the car into park and undid her seatbelt as she opened the door and stepped out of the car. I followed, walking between the traffic. As I followed Kiva, there was a crowd forming a few feet away where an old woman was crying and shouting nonsense. I looked up at the sky again and noticed that the gray clouds were even closer now, and I couldn't see anything in the distance anymore. I glanced back towards the car and then up at the traffic light, which was now green. No one was driving off yet, though, as everyone had gotten out of their cars to investigate. Suddenly, the loud sound of crushing metal caught my attention. As I looked towards the sound, a white pickup truck had been almost completely crushed. I squinted to get a closer look and noticed that there seemed to have been a person inside the truck when it was flattened, and their blood and insides covered the windshield. I looked away quickly as I took deep breaths, trying not to gag. Other people had started to walk toward the crushed truck, and some were gagging and backing up as they realized what they were seeing. What did? Someone screamed again. The sound of crushing metal was heard, and a second car had been crushed. This time, it had only been the hood of the car that had been crushed, and the driver ran out to look at the damage. Get back in your cars now, someone screamed. I locked eyes with Kiva, and we ran to the car, getting in and slamming the doors shut. As Kiva shifted back into drive and managed to pull in between the cars and speed through the intersection, I kept looking behind us as the clouds continued to approach. I could see raindrops now. Some of the people had made it away just in time, and others got caught in the rain. The sound of multiple cars being crushed filled the street as Kiva sped down the road. Luckily for us, it was mainly empty. I held on to the armrest as Kiva kept speeding. Is that the rain doing that? I asked, glancing back again. I think so, Kiva muttered. She continued to drive, hyper-focused on the road. I glanced over at the speedometer. She was going almost 90. I looked over at the side of the road as we passed a speed limit sign but said nothing. I looked back at the approaching storm. The rain had picked up excessively, and all of the trees and stop lights had been crushed. They were now crumpled up in the middle of the road, blocking anyone else from escaping the storm. As I glanced down in the rearview mirror, I noticed that most of the road was gone too. There were giant holes everywhere, making it impossible to drive on. My body flung forward as Kiva hit the brakes. All of a sudden, the sound of the screeching brakes and the tires on the road filled my ears as she tried to stop the car. She exclaimed, and the car finally came to a stop. I looked over at her. Why are you stopping? She motioned towards the road where there was a giant tree branch blocking the way. Help me move it, hurry. I jumped out of the car and helped her push the branch out of the way. As we pushed, I couldn't help but glance toward the storm, which was still rapidly approaching. The rain was also picking up, and it seemed like we were right, the rain was to blame. I used all my strength to push on the branch as Kiva pulled, and we finally got it out of the way. We ran back to the car and I glanced back to see the rain approaching. As the first drop of rain landed on the roof of a small convenience store on the side of the road, it all crumbled to the ground. I slid into the seat of the car. "What do you think happens if it lands on someone?" I asked. Kiva turned to look at me. She opened her mouth to speak but didn't get to, as she glanced out one of the back windows. I followed her gaze and saw a man walking down the side of the road. In a split second, the rain caught up. 1 second he was there, and the next second, there was a splatter of blood and human insides on the sidewalk. "I guess that's your answer," Kiva said as she started driving again. I turned around in my seat to keep an eye on the storm. It seemed that the winds had started to pick up, and I could hear them whistling as Kiva continued to drive. "It's getting faster," I replied. She said nothing, but I could feel the speed of the car picking up. We'd been on the road for about half an hour now, and the storm seemed to consistently pick up speed with each second that passed. I couldn't stop myself from looking back at the approaching storm and all of the damage that the rain had done. We'd seen it crush a few more people as it passed through. I don't know how long this storm is going to last or how far out it's going to travel, I thought. But I'm hoping that I can at least warn a few people. Maybe you can make a plan to outrun it. We're going to run out of gas soon, and there's no way that we would have enough time to stop and fill up on gas without the storm catching up to us and crushing our car, and then us. I don't know what we're going to do. We haven't even passed another car that we could potentially steal to try to outrun the storm. I don't know if anyone will even see this or how this will even help, but if you start to see the storm approaching, start running. We started in New Jersey, where we're from, and made our way west. It was a great time. We saw stuff that we always talked about seeing. After day 3, we finally hit the dreaded boring part of the drive, Nebraska. Nothing but cornfields as far as the eye can see. It was about 6:30 p.m., and the sun was starting to set. I looked at the gas gauge, and it read 1/4 of a tank. I told my buddy we should start looking for a gas station. He checked the GPS, and nothing for at least 100 miles showed up. I started to get nervous because the last thing we need is to run out of gas in the middle of Nebraska with literally nothing around at night. That's how horror movies start. Finally, as we crested a small hill, my fears, at least for the time being, were put to rest. Down the road, maybe half a mile, we saw a blue sign that said, "Gas next exit." Little did I know that the next exit was another 30 miles away. So we drove and drove, all the while with one eye on the gauge. Finally, we saw the exit and got off. The gas light on the dashboard came on, warning us we had less than a gallon left. The sign pointed to the right at the end of the exit ramp and said, 10 miles gas. The car we were driving was a 200 Ford Explorer. Being an old SUV, I knew it barely got 14 miles to the gallon on a good day. I shared a look with my friend, we both shrugged. I made the turn, and we continued on. The sun had now gone down, and for those of you who have never been to the Midwest at night, it's not like being in the city. When the sun goes down, there is no ambient light whatsoever. No street lights, no lights from a major city giving off the comfortable orange glow, nothing. Just an endless darkness in all directions. Even the highway offered no lights. I turned on the high beams and could barely see 50 feet in front of me. My spider sense was tingling at this point, but we pressed on. What other choice did we have? Minutes passed, but they felt like hours. I kept my eyes peeled for any possible animals that might dart out in front of me. Suddenly, the car started to shudder. My friend and I both shared an "oh, look" as we started going up another hill. The car barely made it up and crested the hill. As we did, we saw our salvation, lights from a gas station. If I had only known what was going to happen next, I would have gotten out of the car and run back to the interstate. We rolled down the hill and entered what I can only describe as a ghost town. There were buildings, shops, and houses, every single one of them boarded up. There was one exception, a church sat opposite the station. One of those old ones you would usually see in New York or Paris. It appeared to be sandstone with a huge steeple. It looked like it was brand new, with a nicely manicured lawn and a huge red wooden door. The stained glass windows that lined the outside had pictures telling a story. However, instead of telling the story of the Stations of the Cross or the Virgin Mary, as most churches had, these showed depictions of people burning in fire, their faces twisted in agony under the cloven hoof of what I could only think was the devil. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something here just didn't feel right. The car died about 500 feet from the gas station, so we got out and pushed it the rest of the way. As we got out, I heard something barely audible, almost like a humming, coming from the church. My buddy didn't hear anything, so I assumed I must just be tired. The pump was new, with one of the credit card readers, which struck me as odd, considering everything else in this town, save the church, looked like it hadn't had anyone living in it for at least 30 years. We filled up without incident, and as we finished, the sound, which now sounded like a humming droning, got louder. We got back into the car and left. The road we came in on was a one-way, so the only way out was to go further into the town and hopefully find a road that led back to the interstate. As we drove, we saw more light being reflected off the buildings. We pulled into a town square where there was a huge stage and hundreds of chairs set up for what looked like a concert of some sort. The light was coming from a bonfire in the center of the audience area. As we pulled further into the square, we could see a guy playing music for no one. There wasn't one person in any of the seats. I used to work in the music industry. I know a sound check when I see one. Usually, that happens before the concert, so a musician can check his or her sound with the guy running the soundboard. With no one around, this was not it. He was covered in sweat, screaming his music and playing almost like his life depended on it. We came to a T intersection and a stop sign. We had the windows down because it was summer and we were trying to save gas by not using the AC. The droning humming I heard had gotten louder. It was almost like it was in my head, beating my brain. Now it sounded like it was coming from the buildings themselves. It got louder and louder. The guy playing music screamed even louder, almost like he was fighting the sound. Then a whole lot of things happened at once. The humming reached fever pitch and then stopped abruptly. The bonfire went out. The guy on stage stopped playing. Down on the right of the road, which looked like it was the only way back to the highway, came a mob of people with pitchforks, boards, rocks, and one guy had what looked like a samurai sword. Looking back now, I remember thinking it strange that no one had a gun considering where we were. They came running towards us, screaming and waving their weapons. My buddy and I covered our heads in anticipation of the beating of our lives. They started pounding on the car, even going so far as to break one of the little windows in the back seat. I threw the car in four-wheel drive and slammed the accelerator. The car lurched forward, plastering a few people onto the windshield, but ultimately we broke through the mob. The ones who weren't knocked down from the impact of the car started storming the stage. They jumped onto it and started assaulting the musician with their weapons, his screams echoing off the derelict buildings. I didn't waste any time. I slammed on the gas pedal, cut the wheel, and sped out down the road to the right, the whole time with my friend screaming obscenities. We got back to the highway and drove for another 30 miles until we hit our destination for the night, where our hotel was. We got into our room, trying to make sense of what we had just seen. As I put my bags down, I looked at my friend and he looked at me. We both agreed to go to the police in the morning, as it was now about 3 a.m. The next day, we woke up, packed our overnight bags, and went out to our car. We immediately drove to the police department and asked to speak to a detective, as we had a crime to report. A small bald man from a desk stood up and invited us to come and sit with him. We then proceeded to tell him the whole thing. When we were finished, he asked us, pale as a ghost, "Did you tell anyone else this?" We, of course, responded in the negative, to which he replied, "Good. Keep it that way." With his hands shaking, he showed us the door, and we left. We never spoke of it to anyone else. Immersed between the pines, that was the predicament I currently ended up in, an empty highway spanning miles and miles through one of the most desolate roads in the Rocky Mountains. How long had it been since I was at Jim's diner, looking at the sky gray and foreboding, obvious that a storm was on the horizon. There was that smell in the air, sulfur, between the heat of the afternoon and the sudden chill. I could even feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up. Trapped on this highway, with no exit for 40 miles, no car or truck for at least 2 hours, and my bike broken down. Wonderful, I muttered, exasperated. Could today get any worse? I had run out of gas. There were some farmlands a few miles back, lost to the oncoming darkness and surrounding sea of pines. The odd feeling, beyond the sense of being completely alone, was that of truly being alone. No chirp or buzz, even howling, that would animate these mountains, beyond the roar of tires and horns, like life itself had found residence elsewhere, leaving me in this impersonation of the world I once was in. Climbing up the hill, feeling the first drops of rain hitting my leather jacket, I felt the first tinge of fear. Until the end of the hill, I saw an exit, plain as day. The name of the town was Padua, the other name was scribbled out. Padua, I thought. Beggars can't be choosers. The walk didn't take as long as I expected it would. The cut into the pines led to a town trapped in another time. Not a ghost town from the last century with broken-down ranches and general stores, but a town that looked like a postcard from the 50s. That retro look was long associated with the big bop monster movies and drive-in theaters. There was only one problem with the site: not a single soul, nor a single car, was moving throughout the town. Instead, there was only the same silence I had heard throughout the mountain highway. There wasn't much more to think about. I resolved to explore the town as it started to come more into view with each step and push. There was a gas station not too far away, a diner down the block, and, from the looks of it, a hotel in the center between the two. I should name this town Lucky Break. "Hello," I called out, standing at the gas station, my bike parked at a stall. No dust, the pumps were on but locked. Walking into the store, which was open, the lights flickered almost as a response. Anyone here? The store was completely packed full of food and drinks, just no worker. Maybe he's on break, I muttered to myself, trying not to dissect the logic any further. I grabbed a protein bar and a bottle of water. It was still cold and fresh to the touch. There was a feeling that I was being watched. Maybe it was just the eerie feeling of being alone. As the doors shut behind me, I could have sworn I saw a shadow sitting at the register. When I did a double take, I found the store completely empty. Drinking the water and chewing on the bar, it had been hours since I had eaten or drunk anything. I released the trigger to let the gas pump start. There wasn't any other way I knew how to get it to work, no credit card slot, no manual pump on the outside. Must be an older job. When I finished filling up the bike, I took in the scenery and watched the clouds. The bike came to life, and I looked around, still feeling that sense of not being alone. Oh well, I spoke aloud as I entered the empty street. I decided that, while it was only slightly drizzling, I might as well explore the town. Spanning only a few blocks, lights were on in most buildings. However, there wasn't a sign of a single human, animal, or even insect. Like a model or a set of a movie left alone, tomorrow they'd come back and start again. There were a few buildings I tried. I needed a bathroom anyway. A few cloth shops, nothing that I needed or wanted. Being on a bike limits what can be carried. Then there was a library, stacked with books. There was a theme I noticed, not thanks to the books, but the periodicals. Nothing past the date of 1958. That didn't make sense. The last article read about the local football team going off to take the championship on October 21st. What happened October 22nd? There was too much to think about. The only thing that mattered was finding shelter and maybe getting a proper dinner. In all this commotion, I realized leaving the library that I still hadn't charged my phone. What was I thinking? Finding the diner I had passed before, the setup was one of those tube-like buildings that used to populate the country, slowly disappearing one by one to make way for franchises. Hello, I left my bike in the parking lot. The rain started to pick up, nothing hard yet, but it was coming soon. Again, I began to wonder why I would even ask. At this point, I'm just going to let myself in. I found a place for my phone to charge. The outlet looked a little weird, but it fit. When the screen came on, I could have guessed as much, no signal. Looking around the empty diner with its colorful booths, counter cakes in the displays, the grill in the back, even a jukebox and cigarette dispenser, I walked up, placing a few loose quarters in both. I found myself putting "Jingle Jingle Jingle" on the jukebox, a cigarette hanging out of my mouth. I checked the back room, the grills all worked and even the ovens. Playing with the switches, I found myself even dancing to antiquated songs, singing with a sparse knowledge of the lyrics. There was a fridge full of vegetables, red meat, even a steak. Putting the steak on, I heard "The End of the World" by Skeeter Davis starting to play. The eerie song almost put the sound of complete silence in perspective. I'm a cemetery operations coordinator, or you can just call me a cemetery manager. Part of my job is sitting down with guests and family members of the deceased to set up funerals, facilitate the sales of plots. A 30-something-year-old man named Claude, a very spiritual man, once sat down with me to purchase a plot for his sick father who was in hospice care. Claude was a Hispanic man with a very thick accent, and I saw in his eyes he was a very caring man. He showed me pictures of his father, who also looked like a very sweet man, much too young to be taken away from his family. Unfortunately, the man's time came that same week, and Claude arranged for his father's funeral service at the cemetery. It was a very stormy day, the day of the funeral, which is thought to be a sign of good luck. The funeral procession stopped in front of the front office building briefly. I stepped outside under the front awning of the building and saw Claude in the car behind the hearse. We waved at each other. Due to the weather, I went back inside until the procession was ready to proceed to the burial site. I got in one of the cemetery pickup trucks and followed the procession to the final stop where I would stand with my umbrella, supervising, as part of my job is making sure funeral services go smoothly. After the funeral, I did some laps around the place in the truck just to survey the area, as I did at least a couple times a day. I had a lot of paperwork to take care of, and on top of this, I had to close the cemetery that night. So, a little later, I went back to my desk and took care of this. The cemetery closes at 5:30, so as soon as it started to get dark, I drove around the place one more time to ensure all visitors had left, then drove over to the front gate to shut it. It was a relatively warm early March. The days were still on the shorter side, so by closing time on a normal day, it would already be getting darker, but on this stormy day, it already felt like it was nighttime. I was driving back to my office when I thought I saw someone hurriedly walking down one of the lanes of tombstones before turning behind a hedge and disappearing out of sight. I beeped my horn to let them know the place was closed, but strangely enough, I didn't see them again. I grabbed my umbrella and ran out into the rain in that direction. I turned beyond the hedge they turned at and looked down this long row of tombstones on one side and hedges on the other. I didn't see anyone. I looked around in the rain for a solid 20 minutes, but eventually, I had to give up. I drove back up to the office and browsed through the CCTV footage. None of it picked up any unusual movement, even though it was a bit harder to see much because of the storm, and it was also pitch black outside now. I tried to multitask, keeping an eye on the camera while finishing up some of my paperwork, when I heard the front door to the visitation room slammed shut. I sprang up from my chair and yelled, "Hello." My first thought was that it was the same person I saw before. Maybe they got locked in the cemetery and were looking for assistance in leaving. I stepped out into the lobby, but no one was there. I looked around and again said, "Hello." Maybe the door slamming shut was them leaving. I started looking out all the windows, and I stopped when, through one of them, I saw someone on the other side looking back at me with a blank expression. I jumped back and screamed, and they didn't flinch. I stepped closer and made a squinty-eyed, confused look when I realized I recognized this Hispanic, older-looking man. In my head, it reminded me exactly of the pictures of Claude's father he showed me. With my heart in my throat, I ran out the front door of the building and to the side where I saw the man, but he was gone. He wasn't booking it into the fields. He wasn't hiding in a bush nearby. He was gone. I looked around me as I stood in the rain getting soaked, then ran back inside, packed up my things, locked up, and got in my car. I opened and closed the gate once more, locking it behind me, and drove home. When my wife asked me at home why I was being so quiet, I just told her it was a long day at work. To this day, I think I was just overworking myself, and my mind was playing tricks on me, but it still is genuinely disturbing to think about. My name is Craig. This was in the dead of October, chilly and windy. I live in a somewhat big town. It's very poor and old, with early 18th century type buildings. A friend and I were bored one night and decided to go around at 3 a.m. I know that going out at 3 a.m. in a poor town isn't exactly smart, but we like to have our fun. We got bored of driving around blasting our music. We're both very big metal heads, and at that point, we had our own band, so we decided it would be interesting and cool to walk around a cemetery in the town behind the old town square. There's a massive cemetery. It's divided by two sides of a highway, both sides taking up about 20 acres of land. As I said, it's massive. We decided to check out the older part of the cemetery. This part is completely separated from the rest of the newer cemetery with an old iron fence and gate. We got to walking around and checking out the cemetery, trying to read the old moss-covered graves, taking pictures, being a little bit disrespectful, I know, but these were graves from at least a century ago, so there was no one living that would be upset by it, and I'm sure the people in the graves didn't mind too much. After about an hour of checking it out, we sat down next to a giant pecan tree in the middle of the old cemetery. That's when we heard this little girl laughing. It was really close to us. At first, I assumed maybe it was a toy left on a child's grave or something like that. I'm not one to scare easily, so I just figured it's motion activated or something like that. We are not at all easy to scare, so we both sort of laughed, pointing out that it's creepy, and just kept talking and enjoying the ambience. Then, as in all stories like this, I got the feeling of something or someone watching me. Once again, I just figured that I was letting the entire thing get into my head. Then my friend says he thinks he sees someone in the shadows of a small wooded area right next to the cemetery, of which we were really close at this point. We're both a little creeped out and decided to get up and leave. And that noise, the exact same noise, played again. When we heard leaves crunching underneath the feet of someone, that's when we booked it. We ran down the hill leading to the old part of the cemetery, down to where my car was parked. I've never run that fast in my life. It sounded like that laughing noise was following us. At that point, we both sort of just went into full fight or flight mode, going as fast as we could without thinking. The noises behind us stopped as we got to my car. I started my car and put it in drive, pulling out into the highway without looking. Luckily, no one hit us. We got down the road to the only gas station that's open at this time of night to check in the back of my car. We had both been discussing how we were scared some had been done to it. We got around to check and immediately found the back doors open. I know for a fact neither of us ever opened it. There was no reason for us to open it. I looked in the back seats to make sure nothing was there, got right back in the car, and peeled out. I'm still confused about what happened that night. I'm not sure if we both overreacted or what. All I know is that I still feel that weird feeling that something is behind you whenever I tell this story. When I was 18, my friend Dash, who was a big goofball, came over to chill in our basement as he often would during the summer. I remember he had a Coke bottle in his hand, and I was eating Wendy's when he said we should check out that creepy little cemetery across town. It was the most random idea ever, and I even told him that. Still, we had no school the next day, and I knew exactly which cemetery he was talking about. I don't know if one should even call it a regular cemetery. It's just a small plot of land with maybe 100 tombstones at most. The tombstones were very archaic looking, and any time we'd pass, there would be no signs of anyone having come to visit within the last decade. The site probably dated back centuries and had this super creepy vibe to it because it was closed off by a Gothic metal fence and surrounded by woods on two sides, the road on one, and some old abandoned building on the other. Everything about it just gave scary vibes. It took a little persuading, but Dash managed to get me to want to check it out too. Ironically, it was a very cloudy, reddish kind of day, conveniently adding to the mood. Dash pulled up his Honda to the side of the road. I told him to pull up more so it wasn't obvious. This was a low-traffic road, so it would look kind of suspicious. He pulled up a few hundred feet down the road, and we got out and cut through the woods so that any potential passing traffic wouldn't see us entering the little cemetery. Hopping the fence in the woods was easy. It was maybe a 3 or 4 foot fence. Dash kind of took the lead on this since it was mainly his venture. He led us through the eerie little plot of land, and we looked at the archaic tombstones. They all seemed to be from the 19th century. The writing on some of them was illegible at that point. I know it sounds super dumb and cliché, but I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched constantly. I started looking around the surrounding woods. I told Dash how creepy this was. "I know," he replied. Still with the feeling of being watched, I looked at the abandoned building next to the cemetery, at one of the windows. For a brief moment, I knew I saw someone standing at the window, even through the fog, smudge, and dirt on the glass. But they casually either ducked or walked away from the window. I told Dash we were being watched by someone in that building, and he turned to look at it as well. Then he went to look for the entrance to it. I told him, "Don't." I said we should just leave before we get in trouble. I stayed still by the tombstone he was looking at while he walked around a building, and then he found a way in. He called me over, but I stayed put. I heard some loud kind of crack, so I looked in that direction, and there was this older man, probably around 55. Gray hair, had on a black raincoat. I believe he was wearing jeans, and he had a mustache, but that's all I really got of him. Then he opened his mouth and screamed. Not just yelled, he screamed, "Get out." He screamed it so loud I thought I saw birds fly away from being startled. Just like that, I started to feel lightheaded, and suddenly everything went dark. The next thing I remember was waking up to being dragged in the woods. I freaked out, thinking I was being kidnapped, but when I turned and got up, I saw it was just Dash. Dash was freaking out about something. He told me to follow him and run back to the car, so I didn't ask questions. As we ran through the woods, I heard something close behind me, and when I turned, I realized we were being followed by someone. So I ran even faster. We got to his Honda, and he basically put it in drive before the car even had a chance to fully start. When Dash was inside that abandoned building, he found a sigil of Baphomet painted on the wood floor, which is basically the sign of Satan. Around it were a bunch of freaky dolls with buttons for eyes. He didn't get to see anything else in the building because he heard the old man scream at me outside. He came running to find me passed out on the floor, and he saw the old man slowly walking over to me. He started to drag me away from the old man and into the woods. He actually literally picked me up and threw me over the fence to get me out. I quickly came back to consciousness, and that's when we ran. I had only fainted one time in my life, and it was at that moment. I don't know why I fainted, but it happening at a graveyard with some kind of satanic ritual building right next to it makes it that much stranger. My grandpa passed away a few years ago. I was always very close with him. This past August, on his birthday, I paid him a visit at the cemetery. The cemetery he and my grandma chose to be buried at was about an hour drive from my apartment. My family lived closer, so they all went to his grave together. I had to go separately. It was a rainy, depressing day, and there's nothing worse than visiting a cemetery on a gloomy day. The gatekeeper of the gate asked for the plot number. I gave it to him, and he let me in. It's a pretty big cemetery, and I'd only been there a couple of other times, not as the driver though, so I had a hard time finding it. I didn't see many other people, if any, at the cemetery that day. I'm sure the weather had something to do with it. Eventually, I found his stone and parked my car in the grass to the side. I put some flowers down under a stone, stood there for a while with my eyes closed, and prayed. When I finished my prayer, I opened my eyes and looked up. There was an old man standing about 5 rows of graves down directly across from me, and he was looking right at me. I knew this man, though. It was my grandfather. No, it couldn't be. I rubbed my eyes, and he was gone. Did I just have a spiritual moment, or were my eyes and mind playing tricks on me? Either way, I got the chills, and I had goosebumps. I was quite honestly freaked out. I got back in my car, said, "Love you, Grandpa," and drove off. I felt like I had a headache on my way home, not sure why. I was the only car on Prospect Road, a quiet road with dense forest on either side. Commonly, there would be deer crossing here. My car zipped down the road. I spotted someone on the side of the road coming up, which was odd because there were no sidewalks or a walking path on this road. I slowed down. It couldn't be. It looked like my grandpa again. When I realized this, my heart dropped 1,000 feet, and I swerved the car accidentally. I desperately tried to regain control and come to a stop. Luckily, my car didn't end up in a tree, rather, it just skidded out in the middle of the road until coming to a halt. I immediately looked back to where I saw him and saw a deer on the side of the road looking at my car. My heart was literally racing. I was terrified and not well, and I needed to get home. I made sure no cars were coming and got back in my lane. I focused on the road as best I could, given what I had just seen twice. I felt weird the rest of the day, not sick, but something wasn't right with my head. I went to bed early after watching an episode of my show. I woke up at like 3 in the morning to my phone ringing. It was an unknown number. My heart started racing again. Any call at this hour couldn't be good news. I accepted the call and put the phone up to my ear. It was static on the other end. Finally, I said, "Hello." More static, but what I thought I heard next, I couldn't believe. Just briefly, for maybe half a second, I thought I heard my grandpa's voice over the static. I tried to say hello again, but I was too shook. Every part of my body was actually shaking. Then the call cut to silence and ended. I called my phone provider the next day to trace the number. They couldn't. They didn't have enough data to trace it apparently, though I don't know if that was just or not. The events that took place that day and night were the scariest I've ever experienced. Do I think my dead grandpa was trying to contact me? I don't know, because that sounds ridiculous. You think if you experience something like this, you'd be so full of emotion and joy, but no. It still terrifies me, and I really still don't know what to think or how to feel about it. Whether it sounds ridiculous or not, this happened, and I wonder almost every other night, was that really my grandpa on the phone? My friends and I were very stupid when we were teenagers. I was like 16 or 17 when this happened. It was the month of October, and I wanted to do something scary in the spirit of Halloween. There's a small cemetery about 15 minutes from where I live, and when I was drunk with a couple of friends, I said we should sneak into it. I'll make up some names for my friends, Dion and Ezra. We were at Dion's house. He didn't drink ever, so when I came up with the idea, he was the one to drive us to the cemetery. Ezra and I were really the ones leading this. Dion was just along for the ride. But then again, he hadn't been drinking. Dion parked in some parking lot across the street. It was a ghost town because it was past midnight at that point. We made sure no one was around to see us as we hopped the fence into the cemetery. It wasn't exactly pitch black out, but it was slightly hard to see more than 10 feet in front of us, so we were all using our iPhone flashlights. There didn't appear to be any night security in the cemetery, so we kind of dispersed from each other. Dion seemed to be following Ezra more closely. I could still see where they were because of their flashlights. I went off a little further on my own and decided I'd start taking a creepy video. So I started recording with the lights still on, of course. I recorded a bunch of old headstones and the general eerie vibe of the cemetery at night. I didn't see Ezra and Dion anymore, so I started to go look for them, still recording. I looked at my phone screen and froze. There was a woman dressed in a white gown or a dress, I want to say, with long gray-looking hair. She was looking down at the ground. I looked up from my phone screen to look at her in person, but she was gone. I started to back away. I looked back at my phone screen, and there she was again, only now she was looking into the camera, or rather looking at me. I looked up from the phone again and could not see her once more, so I looked back down at the screen again, and there I could see her moving closer to me. I started to scream for Ezra and Dion as I sprinted away from that spot. I couldn't see their lights anywhere. They weren't answering my screams. I had a feeling they were going to try to scare me, so I ran back for the fence of the cemetery to hop it and get out. I made it to Dion's car and texted the two of them, saying they need to get out of the cemetery now. They met me at the car minutes later. We all sat in a car, and I showed them the video I took. They had the same horrified looks on their faces I did. Now that I was actually watching the whole video, I could see the moment the woman slowly lifted her head from looking at the ground to looking at me, and then she starts to move towards me. We could only see her moving for like a second or two before I start screaming in the video and running away. But the way she was moving, we could see no leg movement. It almost seemed as though she were floating to me. I have that video saved on my old iPhone 5S, but the stupid thing won't turn on. It gets stuck at the Apple logo. I don't want to reset that phone until I can get that video off of it somehow. My friends firmly believe the woman in the video was a real living person who also happened to be in the cemetery that night, but me, having been the one to actually find her and only being able to see her on my phone screen, well, let's just say I was never a believer in the paranormal until that night foreign. Foreign off this chick that was a little unstable to say the least. She'd probably kill me if she heard what I was about to say using her real name, so for my own sake, I'm going to refer to her as Jane. To make a long backstory short, she came from a messed up family, and her dad was sort of at the center of a lot of her problems. When he finally died, she told me she went to the funeral just so she could find out where he was buried. A few days later, in the middle of the night, Jane called to ask me to take her to the cemetery to smash his gravestone. Although that was something I would never do to anyone, no matter how much I hated them, I could understand why Jane would want to do something like that against her father's memory. She didn't have a license, so I picked her up and we drove to the cemetery. When I parked the car in the visitor lot outside, she pulled a hammer and a handful of grocery bags out of her purse. She said she just wanted to go in, smash it up into a bunch of small pieces, bag it up, and leave. Obviously, I knew that we were breaking at least one law by trespassing into the cemetery after dark, but this was all right with me. I just told her I would keep an eye out for anyone in the area while she did what she needed to do. On that note, we got out and hurried over to the grave. Jane knew exactly where it was, so it took us no time at all, but I was still extremely nervous about the whole thing. It wasn't just the threat of being arrested, but the vibe of the cemetery itself. I really felt like I wasn't supposed to be there, like we were disturbing all those dead people by marching through in the middle of the night. I kept my hat on straight and tried to give Jane space. At first, She spent a minute kneeling on top of the relatively fresh grave, whispering a bunch of curses and crying just from the sheer intensity of whatever emotion she was feeling. But then, without warning, she started screaming and striking the headstone. The first time caught me so off guard that it sent chills through my whole body. I spun around and was about to tell her to quiet down, but at first glance, I knew she wasn't going to hear me. She was going absolutely berserk on this stone, screaming and wailing at the top of her lungs. Each time she hit it with the hammer, only a small piece would break off. I realized we were going to be there for a while if it went on at this pace, and she was making so much god-awful noise I was terrified that somebody in the nearby neighborhood would hear us. I also thought about how blood-curdling it would feel to be walking by the graveyard and hear Jane's banshee-like shrieking in the distance, and to be unsure if she was like a ghost or a serial killer or something. My instincts set in and I became more concerned about my own safety than anything else. Here was this completely unhinged, crazy person violently thrashing her way through a mixture of grief and unhealed trauma, seeing red with total tunnel vision, and I was alone with her, surrounded by darkness and dead people. I was worried that if I got near her, she would forget it was me and think I was the ghost of her father and start trying to kill me or something, so I backed away. However, it wasn't long before the deep-seated rage within Jane started to wear off a bit and she became tired. She then stopped and looked at the progress she had made. 2/3 of the headstone was still intact, but she was already exhausted. That's when she looked back at me, and for the first time, I saw the look of unveiled insanity in Jane's eyes. I'd always known Jane had a few screws loose, but this was next-level crazy. All her movements were sudden and jarring. She stood and shoved the hammer into my chest, telling me to take it and finish the job. I protested at first, not wanting to get roped further into what I thought was Jane's thing she needed to do, but as soon as I did, she grabbed me by the ears and yanked my head down so that my face was less than an inch away from hers. She then screamed so loud that it practically ruptured my eardrums. She demanded that I break the gravestone for her or she'd use the hammer on me and bury my body next to her father's. Seeing that I was in too deep to back out, I reluctantly accepted the task and committed myself to making short work of it. Of course, I was stronger than Jane, but I wasn't nearly as uninhibited. What happened next, though, made me all the more sure that I shouldn't have tried to fight her or anything. As I was hacking away at the stone, managing to break off bigger pieces, she was standing behind me laughing like an absolute maniac. She was cheering me on the way I imagine a witch would encourage another witch to their first human sacrifice. I tried my best to ignore her, but it was impossible. I glanced over my shoulder and saw that she had pulled out a knife, which sent another chill down my spine. Before I knew it, she knelt behind me and straddled my back, throwing her arms over my shoulders, whispering little pure evil into my ears. I froze up and stopped swinging the hammer because I didn't want to hit her. She told me I was almost done. Then she did something I'll never forget. Both of her hands were out in front of me, one of which held the knife right before my eyes. She put the blade to her palm and sliced it open, creating a fountain of blood which quickly spilled down her wrist. Then she whispered some kind of satanic blessing in tongues and smeared her bloody hand over my face, from my forehead down to my chin, then across my throat until she finally rested her hand with a vice grip at the base of my neck. She asked me if I could taste the blood, and I said I could. She took pleasure in this, and then she finally let go of me to stand on the grave again. Then she screamed out at the top of her lungs that these would be the final tears she would ever cry over her father. As she looked up into the night sky with her eyes open, she put her hand up to the moon and clenched her fist, squeezing the wound to form drops of blood which fell down upon her eyes and face. I watched this whole thing, stunned out of my mind, until she looked back at me with her face full of bloody tears and growled at me to finish the job. Of course, I was thoroughly terrified of Jane by this point and I was ready to leave. I just did as she said. At last, when the whole thing was smashed to bits, I convinced Jane that we needed to go. Thankfully, she seemed ready, but the entire time we were picking up the pieces and bagging them, she was giggling. When it was all cleaned up, we ran back to my car, somehow going through this whole entire ordeal without anyone seeing us or calling the cops on us. I drove Jane back home and I dropped her off. As she got out of my car, she tried to drag me out to spend the night with her. I'd been waiting for that night for months, but by then I knew where that would go. I knew it would be no good for me, so I made up some excuse about having to work the next day in the morning. I cut off all contact and I've been avoiding her out of fear ever since. I'll never forget when I worked nighttime security at a cemetery for about 2 weeks. It was never something I wanted to do as a security guard, but I didn't have a choice. The agency I worked for forced me to transfer due to an incident where I allegedly assaulted a kid who happened to have rich parents while doing my job. I'm not allowed to talk about that case, though, so I won't. I didn't want to work at a cemetery for obvious reasons. Unfortunately, my boss told me to accept the transfer or resign from the agency, and I wasn't ready to be out of a job. The cemetery in question was the oldest in the city, and it was considered historic. However, it had just signed a contract for nighttime security after a couple of grave robberies that had recently occurred. It only happened twice in recent history, but in the span of a couple of weeks, which indicated that it might happen again. Aside from the daytime toll with workers, I was the first security guard to work there, which meant I had nobody before me to tell me how things might go. I couldn't instill the first night, so I made a lot of walkabouts to the burial grounds in an effort to desensitize myself from how damn spooky it was in the dark. It had the opposite effect, though. At one point, I came across one of the graves that had been robbed. It was already refilled, although the grass hadn't been recovered yet. The marker was eroded, but I could tell that it was a woman who had lived to be pretty old. I paid my respects and I walked on without thinking much of it. Over the course of a few nights, nothing happened. It was one of the more boring starts to a job that I've had. I was used to getting off work around 4 or 5 a.m. at the latest, but I was in the graveyard from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., 3 nights a week, and that schedule didn't suit me. I became extremely drowsy halfway through each shift, and the coffee available in the booth was like water to me. When I went back for my second round of shifts, I was already over it. There was nobody around to notice, though, so I didn't care. I was through with my first week, so I figured my supervisors would be more relaxed about watching over the camera footage. Instead of trying to force myself to stay awake when I was exhausted and nothing was happening, I let myself sleep when I felt like it. I didn't think the grave robbers would actually come back and try their luck for a third time once they knew I was there, and it's not like I had a problem stealing company time from the agency that screwed me over. However, there was one party who had a problem with me sleeping on the job. The last night I worked there, I was exhausted from the previous shifts and it didn't take too long for me to start dozing off in my chair. I actually fell into a deep enough sleep to start dreaming. I don't remember how the dream started, but I know that at some point it suddenly became a nightmare. I'd laid down thinking I was about to get a massage or something, only to feel immense pain in my stomach. I screamed and opened my eyes to see an elderly woman standing above me with a shovel, plunging it into my abdomen and digging out my insides. I couldn't move, and all I could do was watch her eviscerate me. It was the most vivid dream that I've ever had. Luckily, I was able to force myself awake. I opened my eyes with a start. Then, right there on the other side of the booth window, I saw that same decrepit old woman staring right at me. I jumped back and fell off the chair, losing sight of her for a second. When I got to my feet, she was gone, but I was thoroughly shaken. I was terrified by the thought of going out there, but I knew it was my job to go looking for anyone who attempted to trespass. To be honest, I didn't feel any safer being a sitting duck in the toll booth. I stepped outside into the cold under a full moon and turned on my flashlight, throwing the beam in every direction. At first, I didn't see anyone, but then my heart skipped a beat when I saw a figure standing near the back of the property by the trees. I shouted at them, but they didn't respond. I had to look away for a second as I heard rustling in the bushes behind me, but it was thankfully just a possum that I startled into running off. That was logical and reassuring, although there was still that mysterious figure standing by the woods. But, of course, when I looked back, she was gone. I couldn't understand how such a frail old woman was covering so much ground, but I marched over to where I last saw her without thinking about it. I had to walk across the entire graveyard to get to the back of the property. Along the way, it seemed like every single creature in the woods was going insane. I heard flocks of birds suddenly take flight from all the trees at once. An owl let out one of those awful screeches that they make. Even a pack of coyotes started to go haywire in the distance. I felt like all the forces in nature were warning me not to keep going, but in my gut, I was worried that if I stopped walking, something else would happen. So I pressed on until I finally got to the edge of the graveyard. I looked around with a flashlight and called out to the person I saw, but I didn't see or hear anyone. Then, as quickly as it all had started, all the noises in the woods stopped. Every single animal fell silent, even the bugs went quiet. I muttered to myself in confusion and started to turn around. But that's when I noticed I was standing right on top of one of the graves that had been robbed, the one of the old woman that I'd seen the week before. As soon as I realized this, I felt stiff hands wrap around my throat and my feet were kicked out from under me. I couldn't see who was doing this to me, but they were strong as hell. They bashed my face into the recently replaced dirt probably a dozen times until it started to feel like I was about to pass out from lack of oxygen. Then, at the last second, it stopped. I felt the rough touch of the hand simply disappear. I quickly got to my feet in a panic, but I couldn't see anyone in the area. It was like I'd imagined the whole thing, but there was no way that I could have. It felt as real as anything else. Whatever it was had me chilled to the bone. I didn't finish my shift that night. I ran to my car with my tail between my legs and quit the job on the spot. This event has haunted me ever since. I've pieced together what it meant over the years. The spirit of the old woman who was robbed didn't take kindly to me slacking on the job, and she took matters into her own hands to make sure it never happened again. I've never been a superstitious person, but sometimes things happen in life that make you reevaluate your assumptions. Even now, when I'm at work and I feel myself getting the urge to slack off, I see that woman out of the corner of my eye for a split second, reminding me of the lesson she taught me.